All right, welcome back in, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the conversations so far. We are at noon Eastern time right now, 10 a.m. where I'm at here in Colorado, getting ready for the live event coming up later on today from University of Colorado. I'm very excited to be able to share some of my story and to talk a little bit more about diet culture and orthorexia. But in the meantime, we've got a full afternoon ahead of conversations. And this next conversation that's coming up really means a lot to us here at ANAD because we've got our peer mentorship program. And Larone is the coordinator for the program, and she just does a fantastic job when it comes to matching our mentors and our mentees. And we hear nothing but amazing things out of every match. So I'm excited for you to listen into Larone's conversation with Claire over from Eating Disorder Foundation. So I will go ahead and get that conversation pulled up for you right now.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, how's it going? Good to see
It's
you.
good. Yeah, it's so great to see you, and it's so nice to be able to talk to my counterpart, who is in charge
Yes,
of another
absolutely.
mentorship program.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been in this role for like 2 years now at EDF's mentorship program, so I'm excited to talk about our similarities and how it really helps in the recovery process. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and there are also some differences, and I feel that the programs really complement each other and kind of give
Mhm.
people two different options. So I'd love to talk about what we have in common and what sets us apart and what people can, how can people benefit from both programs. So you work at EDF, where
Yep.
can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the mentorship program?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if I haven't said, my name is Claire. I'm a program coordinator at the Eating Disorder Foundation. We're a nonprofit that's based in Denver, Colorado, but we have virtual services all for free, and it's all peer support. So, one of our main programs is our mentorship program. So, we run it on a 10-week quarterly schedule throughout the year. So, we really like to look at it as like a short-term intervention. You get matched up with a mentor who is around the same age as you, has similar intersections, identities as you, and you really get to work on one specific goal throughout the 10 weeks. And we really like to view it as like taking that 10 weeks to really build yourself up, get growth, really just feel like you're feeling more empowered and motivated for recovery. So that's like our main goal. I know yours is a little longer term, being 6 months. So I think, yeah, we like to look at ours as like a brief intervention almost. But I think the biggest thing is just like breaking that silence and talking about eating disorders. The more you talk about it, the more you're actively working towards your recovery. So I think that's the biggest takeaway of a program like ours.
Yeah, yeah. So my name is Liron, and I am the program coordinator, the mentorship program coordinator for ANAD. We're also a nonprofit, also all peer support based, and all of our services are free and virtual. And so for us, the program lasts 6 months. So we recruit twice a year, sorry, both mentors and mentees. And we are also very goal focused in that we like our mentees and our mentors to work towards goals, but they can be varied, they can be small, they can be big, they can change, they can evolve. And really, it's just like you said, a lot of it is about the connection, it's about breaking that isolation, having somebody who can embody that hope that recovery is possible and that belief in the mentee that they can do it as well. Um, and really working towards this something so meaningful that both the mentee gets but also the mentor by being
Absolutely.
able to take such a difficult experience from their past and turning into something that's so purposeful and meaningful, that we feel that it's a win-win and everybody benefits, including staff. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I like to say it's a mutually beneficial um, position for the mentors as well. I think they get to really learn like how far they've come. I've heard from our mentors that they're exercising skills they haven't used in a while and really just feel like grateful. I think the biggest line I hear too is like, I wish I had this for when I was struggling when I was in the depths of my eating disorder. So I think a lot of folks view it as like that giving back, but also like they get a lot out of it too. I think it's important to still have community and connection even when you are in sustained recovery. And we kind of like to look at our like mentor group like that too, of like you get to talk with the other mentors, you get to bounce ideas back and forth and talk about what it's like to be in this role, and you get that like community support piece as well, which is super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of support for our mentors because, first of all, throughout the 6 months, they attend supervision, which is a big, scary word for basically just a support group where we talk about what's going on with you and your mentee and how we can better support you. And it's also a place to build community. We have trainings and opportunities for people to share their stories and just attend, social gatherings and other things and all sorts of webinars and just expanding both their toolkits to help their mentees, but just like you said, it's also learning new skills for yourself, practicing skills that you haven't practiced in a while, and even just having that accountability of I'm there, helping somebody else, and I'm going to sustain my recovery and strengthen my recovery because I want to continue being this role model, and I understand how important recovery and maintaining recovery and working on maintaining recovery is. So it's really a beautiful, supportive environment.
Absolutely. We have a similar way of doing things with our mentor support groups. I think they're like every other week, our mentors can get on Zoom with me and whoever else wants to join. And it's the same thing of like, let's support each other. How can we best support our mentees? And also it's just like a social check-in too of like, this is what's going on in my day. Like, this is what's coming up for me. So yeah, it's a really great way for the mentors to stay connected too.
Yeah, and
We
you said,
also do training for our mentors, and I think it's similar with yours. Our requirements for our mentors is at least 2 years in recovery. Of course, we know that looks so different for everyone, but at least for the purposes of becoming a mentor, we really want to make sure you're in a place where you can hear potentially triggering topics and talk intimately about eating disorders, and really feel like that won't compromise your recovery at all. So we take a lot of care in making sure that our mentors feel supported and we're screening properly and making sure that they are in a good place to take on the role.
yeah, absolutely. And you say that a lot of the mentors say that they wish that they had something like that when they were going through their eating disorder. And in fact, we have mentees who come back and become mentors after they've been in recovery for, a long enough period that they feel that they can give back. And that is such a beautiful cycle, that is really the gift that keeps on giving. And it's also, I hear sometimes from mentees while they're in the program, I want to be a mentor someday, and that is an incentive that motivates me to continue working, to continue putting in the hard work, so that someday I can help somebody else. Because it's really, I find that the community of people with eating disorders, they have high levels of compassion and empathy and
Absolutely.
altruism, and really so much of the time wanting to help others can be such a motivating force. So again, it's like from so many different angles, this is a beneficial and beautiful program that we run. And I mean, I'm not biased at all, obviously.
Me neither. Yeah, I feel the exact same way. I think the one of the biggest topics that come up in mentorship is like, how do you keep your motivation to recover? How do you wake up every morning wanting to choose this? And I think that opportunity of knowing that you can eventually be on the other side of it and support someone else is a really big factor for folks. When we going back to like when we were talking about like the goal setting throughout the mentorship too, a really big one is like motivation factors like that. But something about our program too is that we really want to make sure that you're focusing on things outside of your relationship from food and body. So we think that, a goal of limiting eating disorder behaviors or, following a specific meal plan is something that you would do more with a clinical professional. I think the way we look at it, like in our mentorship, is building things outside of that. So, like a common goal that you'd work on for 10 weeks in us is like, I really want to focus on my self care by going for like a nature walk once a week, or I want to focus on going to all of my appointments or something like that. So, we really like to look at it from like that bridge between like the clinical and non-clinical, where we view like the mentorship.
Yeah. So for us, we really, and we talk a lot about goal setting during
Mhm.
the training. And I think the main thing for us is that it comes from the mentee. So the mentee
Absolutely.
comes up with a goal, not the mentor telling them what the goal should be. And then kind of strategizing, okay, let's make sure that the goal, because every time it's a different goal. So for us, it's 6 months. So again,
Mhm.
goals change, and to make it achievable, because it really is important that, it takes the mentee out of their comfort level a little bit, but it's not impossible to the point that they will feel like a failure. We want them to succeed so that they can continue building on the success. And so the goals are really, we try to make them aligned with values, right? We try to kind of differentiate the eating disorder voice from the authentic voice, and what is an eating disorder value and what is our actual value. And then can we set goals that are aligned with our values? And they can be really anything. And we find that a lot of the time also goals kind of overlap. A goal that will be maybe social or, personal in any way, a lot of the time also involves having to set an eating disorder recovery goal so that you can achieve that other goal. So a
Mhm.
lot of the time there's a lot of overlap. But definitely I think that, it's interesting because I used to say, okay, mentorship kind of has two layers. One is the emotional layer of motivation and role modeling and providing hope and all that stuff. And then there's the practical, let's set goals, let's work on coping skills and all those things. And then I found out that hope is a construct that is made of setting goals and achieving them. So there's no difference really. The
It's
two
all
go
intertwined.
hand
Yep. Mhm.
in hand.
Exactly. And I think too, like what I hear, I always like, we do check-ins with our mentors and our mentees, and I always get to hear about like the goal setting and all of that. But I also like to really make sure that both parties know that it's okay, that like this is also just like social connection and community and conversation. You can talk about your day, and it's really, we try to make the emphasis that it's really casual. It is really just connecting with someone. So if you spend your whole 1 hour meeting talking about like an upcoming event that you're excited for and how to stay recovery focused during that, like that's just as good as working on a very specific goal. So I think just that like community and conversation piece sounds like it's the same takeaway for both our programs.
Yeah, especially because, I always say distress tolerance and sitting with the
Mhm.
discomfort is a huge part of recovery
Yes.
work. And so if somebody's having a bad day and they're experiencing some feelings that they just want to sit with and have you sit there with them so that they're not alone with them, that's
Mhm.
in itself so powerful and so empowering to the mentee. So I think that mentorship looks so many different ways and
Mhm.
goals look so many different ways. And really, ultimately, what I always say is it is that human connection. It is knowing that
Mhm.
somebody understands you and not judging you, and that you're not alone in this, and that somebody else was able to do it. And so you have even the tiny bit of hope that you can too. And that is really what is the healing part more than anything else.
Yeah,
Um,
I feel the same exact way.
yeah. And so you also have some requirements that the mentees have to meet in order to join your program, right?
Yeah, so we really think that it works best as like a supplement to your existing clinical support. Because again, the biggest thing we stress is that our mentors are not professionals, they're volunteers. So, and they're trained and they have support, but they're not able to do the same things as like a clinical professional is. So it's not a replacement for that. So one of our requirements is that our mentees have existing clinical support in place, whether that look like therapist, dietitian, and we also think it's important that you're on the outpatient level of care. If you are in any type of higher level of care treatment, like a PHP or IOP, we've include that. We really want you to focus on that clinical care at that point. And then when you step down to the outpatient level is when we think it's best appropriate to apply to a mentorship program. And then we also accept 16 and up. So even if you're, in high school, we can sometimes get fellow high school mentors. And yeah, so those are our three requirements. I think you have pretty similar ones just to make sure that it does feel like an appropriate time to get this type of support.
Yeah, again, just like we feel that very strongly about peer support being additional support, not a
Mhm.
substitute for treatment. And the mentors are trained to use their lived experience, but they're not clinicians, and so it's important
Mhm.
that they're not, in any way viewed that way. So yes, so our mentees do have to be in therapy, meeting
Mhm.
regularly with a licensed therapist, 16 and over as well. Although our mentors' minimum age is 18, so.
Mhm.
But 18 and 16 are not that far apart.
Exactly.
And they have to be residing in the US, and they have to get a clinical clearance from their therapist that they are, that this program is a good fit for them. Just like you said, they're an outpatient level, and that this is a really good time for them to benefit from the program, that they're in a place where they can focus on their eating disorder recovery work, because
Mhm.
the mentorship program is pretty intense, right? They meet every week for an hour. They do work together. So for us, it's 6 months. So we want to make sure that they can, in a place in their life where that commitment is right for them.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's interesting too of like, my favorite parts of the job is like the matching process and really finding that good match. Like I feel like a matchmaker sometimes. So I know like when people ask like what they got most out of this program, I always hear too is like I finally got to talk to someone who looks like me or has the same like co-occurring disorders as me. And that's something as the program coordinator in this role that I take as like my highest priority of like I'm gonna do a screening call with you, ask you about your interests, ask you about what else is going on in your life, so I can learn more about you, and then find you that good match. I think I hear like I've never talked to someone who's also like, for example, like a trans athlete before, and then I somehow have a mentor who's also a trans athlete, and I get to match them up, and it's like such a rewarding process. Or like something else that comes up a lot is like disability or chronic illness. I think matches based off of that can be super powerful, or BIPOC folks, even things that are like, I'm a really artistic person and I would love to get matched with someone who's also artistic, and then they get to do things like visions boards together, or like, create like comics together. I've had a pair do that. So things like that are what's my favorite part of the job, and I think what makes it really unique and different than a lot of other like peer support that's out there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your favorite part about the role is, and matching,
Yeah,
but nothing mine.
yeah.
A huge role, and you have to put it together. And it's just, I don't think that oftentimes mentees or mentors even realize that we look at all these different things, that it's not just sometimes they think that maybe we match based on what type of eating disorder they have. And that's in
Mhm.
fact the last thing that I
Me
usually
too.
look at.
Yeah, that's like the bottom factor, I think.
Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many other things. I mean, I've matched people because they were passionate about animal rights advocacy,
Yep.
things like that, and and they don't even realize that they could meet somebody who doesn't just have that in common with them, the eating disorder part, but so many other things. And that's so validating to be able to talk to somebody who understands all the intersections of, eating disorder with so many other parts of life, and our place in society, and our feelings in our body and all that stuff. And it's just, that's one of my favorite things when people tell me, thank you so much. My match is so amazing. I can't believe
Mhm.
how much this person is like me. And sometimes it comes down to even a gut feeling, because there are
Yeah.
things sometimes that I don't know about people that I haven't asked. We have a very detailed application. I send surveys. I meet with the mentors, and I get to know them very well because I train them. But sometimes it's really like, I don't know, the way that this person has written their application, like the way that they phrase things just make me think
Mhm.
that they would work really well with this person's style. And so that's it. Sometimes there's a little bit of magic in there too. I don't know where it comes
Exactly. Yeah,
from.
I feel the same way too. I think like even something when it's like, oh, I really like to use dark humor in my recovery, and then I know I have a mentor who's like hilarious, and I'm like, okay, this will be a great match together.
Yeah.
It also makes me think like when you ask about like who has access to like eating disorder treatment, who has access to care, sometimes they're not seeing people like them in formal treatment spaces. So of course, this is not a replacement for treatment, but they really do get to meet someone who has had a similar experience to them that, maybe they didn't have access to before. So I think that's also what makes it really special too.
Yeah, and I also love that you brought up, like the vision board and things like that, because I
Mhm.
also love to see how creative mentors can be, and
Yeah.
especially if they meet somebody who is on like a similar wavelength as they are. I've seen people read books together and do arts together, and if they're into kind of more activism, then they lean into that. There are so many ways to be a mentor, and I mean, we give everybody the basic training, and but then they bring their own special identity and who they are, and the mentees bring who they are. And again, I feel like there's a lot of magic that goes in these matches. Just being able to meet with a person on such an intimate level every week and work with them on something that really people don't feel necessarily as comfortable opening up to other people who don't have that personal lived experience. Because sometimes there's shame, sometimes there's just miscommunications or inability to express how you really feel to somebody who really doesn't get it. So having that special place where you know somebody truly understands you, it's just really, really special. And I'm so happy that we can offer that to people.
Me too. I think like a thing that I see come up a lot too is like that role playing aspect of like, just like you were saying, where like, you know, as supportive as friends and family can be, if they don't have that lived experience themselves, it's hard to feel like you're being heard and hard to feel like that you're really like understood in your recovery. So I think when you have a mentor and you can be like, oh, I really want to talk to like my partner about this more, but I don't know how to do it. You get to like practice with a mentor who might have had that experience themselves. So I think I see that as a really cool way to use your mentorship too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think kind of what we're saying ultimately is that mentorship can be so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, for us, it's always mentee led, right? They come to us and they tell us what they need from us, where they are in their lives, what is something they want to work on, what's important to them. So we're always going to listen first and tailor it to what they need and they want. And I just feel so lucky that that's what we get to do every day. I
Yeah, me
mean,
too. Me
I'm gonna do
too.
that.
It's super rewarding on my end, and I think too, like we're Denver based, but we have a in-person building out here, and we can sometimes do in-person matches too. And it's really special when we get two people who never knew each other before, and then they get to meet up here in our building, or sometimes they go like to a coffee shop. I've had a match go to like a rock climbing class before in person, and they get that like community.
Yeah, so for us, it's all virtual. And I know that sometimes people would have liked to meet in person, but what I love about the fact that it's virtual is the fact that I can match somebody in Alaska and somebody in New York
Yep.
because they have a lot in common and will work really well together, even if they will never be able to meet in person, even if they would never have, had the opportunity to be with somebody who is so similar to them if they were constricted to where they lived. So I like to, be able to match anybody and everybody. And it's such a huge country. And to think that, my ability to find somebody who is such a good match is probably because it's not based on geography. So
Yeah.
so they meet virtually, but they meet every week for an hour on video. So it's really important to us that it is on video so that there is that interaction. We can see body language, we can see facial expressions, and thank goodness for Zoom and technology and all that make that possible. I mean, I live far away from my family, so I'm grateful for this all the time.
Yeah.
But I think really, to me, what all of our work, we also have support groups, we have a helpline. What all of peer support work in general is all about the community and about connection. And I think again that is at the very basic healing that we all do is by connecting to somebody else. And so all of our peer support work is both about connection with beneficiaries and with one another. So creating a community where volunteers and our beneficiaries and again staff feel seen and heard and understood, and no matter where they are in their journey, they can find people who understand them and who share a similar experience. I think that's something that is very unique. And I know that it's something that didn't exist in the past. I didn't have it, just like you said.
Yep.
But to me, it's like now that we know that it's possible, it's like, how could we ever do this without this? It's such a huge
Exactly.
part of, again, breaking that isolation that is so much at the heart of this
Yeah, exactly.
struggle.
Sometimes I'll get a mentee who applies and they're like, I've never talked to anyone about this before except for my therapist, and then they get to join our program, and then I get to look at it as like they joined our community, and I get to connect them to your helpline. I get to connect them to our support groups, and they get to really enter like a thing that's bigger than them, and it really helps them just. I think when you talk about like sustaining recovery and how to have that hope and how to know it's possible, I think that community piece is like, yeah, the crux of it all.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Claire. First of all, for me, it's a pleasure to be able to speak to somebody who, again, does the same work and knows the special benefits and rewards and excitement that's around. I mean, right now we're recruiting. So I'm like, I have all my index cards and I'm doing my matching.
Yep, yep.
And I have all over my living room and I'm like,
The big Tetris board, kind of.
I just put it on the rug. It's like all over my rug.
Yep.
But it's so much joy because it is just like, I feel, it's such meaningful work. And I'm so excited about next month when they're going to get to meet the mentors are going to get to meet their mentees. The mentees are going to get to meet their mentors. The team leads are going to get to meet their mentor teams. And, it's just, I know that everybody is so excited. I know how when I was a mentor, right before the first day of the cohort, I would get so excited about, finding out who my new mentee is. So this is just such a thrilling time for us. So I'm just really excited that, we both get to do this and that this is actually how we spend our days. I feel extremely grateful for that.
Too. Yeah. It's such a rewarding job. And I think, too, knowing that like you're out there doing this work too, and, how many people that were able to get matched up and support. Sometimes I hear back from folks like years later of like, I want to be a mentor again, or like, I just thought about this thing my mentor told me, and I really get to stay in touch with a lot of folks. So yeah, I feel very lucky to be in this role and to be able to give this type of support to people. So yeah, I really appreciate you wanting to reach out about this. I think the more folks we can tell about this type of peer support, the better. So yeah, I encourage anyone who's listening to this, who's interested in either becoming a mentor or a mentee, to reach out to either of us. And it's super, super rewarding.
Yeah, and I especially want to say there are some people who might be older who have gone through their eating disorder treatment a while ago, and they don't even know that a program like ours exists. And so I hope this reaches a lot of people out there who might say, "Oh, I want to be a mentor. I didn't even know this existed." Or somebody else who never thought that they could find a place where they could talk to other people on a one-on-one basis and actually work closely with somebody on achieving their goals and, having accountability and having that support, like walking with them hand by hand, 1 week after the other. So I hope this reaches a lot of people, and they can reach either of us and talk to us, and we would be happy to get them involved in our programs. But yeah, this has been such a pleasure and such a joy. And thank you so much for being here today and for doing the important work that you do. And for anybody out there who is listening, I think the main difference is really that yours is very short-term goal focused and ours is a little bit more long-term. So it kind of, it both is a longer-term commitment, but at the same time, it allows for kind of, again, like the evolution of a relationship and goals. So I think they could be really great hand in hand. Sometimes somebody might be in a place where they're looking for a very short-term intervention. Sometimes they might be looking for more a long-term relationship. So there's something for everybody.
Exactly. And I think we have, it sounds like a little bit of opposite schedule. Your program, you're getting started right now. We're about like 4 weeks into ours too. So I think that's helpful for anyone out there who does want to try the different forms of mentorship, to kind of see which one works best for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. Keep doing the amazing work you're doing.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for putting on this wonderful day. Eating Disorder Awareness Week is something that is super important to us. So yeah, we so appreciate you.
Yeah, and keep in touch.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for the day of conversation. We just wrapped up a conversation about the impact of peer mentorship with the Eating Disorder Foundation. And we're about to head into our next conversation, kind of switching tracks. We'll be talking with Kids Eat in Color. Food, Body, and Self, A Parent's Guide. But before we pivot into that conversation, I just quickly wanted to remind everyone that we are a nonprofit. We rely on donations to keep all of our services free and keep our volunteers supported. So if you're able, if there's anything happening in this day of conversation that resonates with you, that you're learning from, please donate if you can. Every dollar helps. And also, we have a raffle going on in collaboration with Alsana, who you'll be hearing from later today in one of our conversations. But there are a couple of really cool prizes. So check that out, scan those QR codes. And now I am going to invite ANAD's program director, Jen Carroll, and Jennifer Anderson on our virtual stage here. Let me get them set up. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, take it away, Jen.
All right, thank you. Hi, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to be here today to talk about how we can promote healthy eating and positive relationship with food and body image in kids. Again, Kristen said, but I'm Jen Carroll. I'm ANAD's programs director, and I'm also a parent. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been a longtime follower of yours. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you, Jennifer, and read your bio. So Jennifer Anderson is a mom of two, registered dietitian, and has a master's of science in public health from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. In 2019, she founded Kids Eat in Color, a resource for families seeking evidence-based information and strategies on child nutrition and feeding. Prior to starting Kids Eat in Color, she coordinated youth nutrition programs at a food bank, performed research in urban food deserts, and consulted for the USDA National Office SNAP-Ed program. Her academic background is in public health nutrition, cultural anthropology, and economics. Welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So just to kick it off, can you talk a little bit about Kids Eat in Color and how you got started?
Sure. So I'm a dietitian, and before I had kids, I was a dietitian. And when I had my first son, he was cute and chubby. His cheeks were like so kissable. And I brought him into his 9-month appointment at the pediatrician, and she said, he's not gaining weight. And in that moment, I just felt like such a failure. I mean, didn't he know he was supposed to be a good eater? I'm a dietitian, you're supposed to eat well.
Right.
Kids, they don't care what you do for your work. But at that point, I was like, okay, this is a different ball game. And I really focused on child feeding, learning as much as I could. And then when my second son came along, he was really showing the signs of becoming a more extreme picky eater. And so I just began to live this very, focused lifestyle and helping my kids get what they needed. And fast forward, my first son is 3. And I thought, you know what? I can't be the only parent having a hard time. And this is like my area of expertise, and I'm having a hard time. So at that point, I started an Instagram account so that I could share what I knew with other parents and feel less alone and help them have less stress. And that is where Kids in Color started. And now it's become what it is now.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you for that. And it's true, our kids don't care what we do for a living, and they're going to be their own people. And part of the joy and stress of parenting is like navigating that with them along the way. And we hear from so many parents that, their priority is to promote healthy eating and healthy body image. And they really want to do this and they want to do a good job. But there's so much information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it can become overwhelming. So I'd love to hear from you, like, what are some of the common misconceptions that parents have about even what it means to promote healthy eating or feed your kids in a healthy way?
I think the number one misconception is that there is one right or best way to feed your child. It puts a lot of pressure on us, and it really sets us up for failure when we believe there's only one right way to wean your baby onto solid foods, or to feed your preschooler, or to get your kids eating veggies. And we really need to get away from that idea and embrace the idea that we have to learn what we need to feed our child, because they are their own person. And
Right.
so when we then take this perspective away from, oh, I have to do this best thing, to I have to really watch and learn and listen to my child, then it eases some of the pressure on us because we're like, oh, you know what? Actually, sometimes we can eat in front of the TV and it's absolutely fine for my child. Or maybe it's even helpful in some cases, whereas, the public health recommendation is, don't eat in front of the TV as often as you can. So I think that's really the mindset that we really need to go into when we're feeding our kids is how can I be curious and listen to my own child and to what they might need in the moment.
Yeah, and to be flexible too. And this really ties into conversations we have in the eating disorder field all the time about things not being so black and white in our thinking about what's right or wrong or healthy or unhealthy, what have you. So thank you for sharing that. And, what are some of the main ways that you do think that parents can foster? I know it's like a big question, it's a general question, but can foster a positive relationship with food. Maybe we could start with mealtime since we were kind of on that already.
Well, I mean, like I said, not eating in front of a screen, that's good. But I think family meals is something to keep in mind. So if we can have a calm, somewhat peaceful meal, now we're dealing with kids here, right? So I say calm and peaceful in quotes because children are at the meal and there's going to be messes and tantrums and like all that stuff. But if we can mostly come to that meal in a relatively regulated state ourselves and they're mostly positive, then those family meals can be helpful for several reasons. One is they're watching you eat. Or another adult or caregiver. My definition of a family meal is one adult with a child where they're sharing food. May or may not be the exact same food. And so that modeling is going to be really important. You don't have to do family meals to be able to feed your child well. But you get a couple things in this package of family meals. You get the modeling, you get food exposure, and you also get some sort of like routine. And then you also get kids ideally sitting, right? So like sitting and a little bit more regulated. You could do these things outside of a family meal, obviously, but family meals can be really helpful for that purpose. But also fun. I mean, that's the other piece of this. If nothing else, like be a little more relaxed, have fun. Those moments where you can pick up the broccoli and sing into it like it's a microphone and pretend the peas are, little green people. And, this sort of thing, especially for the younger kids, but even as they get older, these sorts of games and fun things really, really are powerful. I mean, my kids still eat broccoli because we started playing this game where we pretended there was a bird in their little tree. And we would pretend like, oh, do you hear the birdie in my tree? And then we would eat the broccoli and then they would think it was funny. And then they did it. And that's morphed into 20 questions like, what thing is in my tree? And, I have a 9 and 11-year-old and they are still playing this game of what's in my broccoli tree, which is amazing to me just because it's fun and it's a connection point for us.
It's so important just to set that relaxing environment. And I'll get to asking about folks in our recovery who are our community rather, who are pursuing their own recovery, but having that structure in place and then being able to relax within the, the structure that you've already set. We do family games at my house too. And so now when the kids are sitting down to dinner, they're saying, I get to pick game today. And it's like they know that it's coming and that we're going to have a nice, relaxed dinner. And that's been helpful for us. So, yeah. So we try our best to model this at home. And then inevitably, there are times where our kids are not with us, that they get exposed to diet culture, or maybe they are with us and they get exposed to diet culture. I'd love if you can talk about how you navigate that. Like, say you're with extended family, for example, that we get asked about that a lot. Or even I know, like, when my kids started to learn to read and suddenly it was like it opened them up to this whole other world of labels and messaging. How do you approach that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is beginning like before they can read, because the reading,
Yeah.
love that they can read, but also it opens up, their nutrition facts panel and the weight stigma in books and like all sorts of things. I think stepping back to a little bit before that and back to what you said about not thinking black and white, the way that I kind of think of it is there is a rainbow of color in between black and white. And if we can stay in that rainbow, we can find solutions, we can have more flexibility in our thinking about food. And so if you can get them a little bit into this mindset of like, yeah, it's not that foods are healthy, but it's like how you eat them. And I like to say, well, what would happen if you only ate broccoli? I've yet to meet a kid who's like, oh, that sounds great. No, they're like, I don't think I'd feel good if I only ate broccoli. And then you can also ask them, what would happen if you only ate cookies? And I've also yet to come across a child who's like, that would be great. I would feel good. Now they're like, oh, that doesn't sound right either. And so by asking questions like this, building up to those conversations that they're going to be exposed to, I think the more they can hear those conversations and think, okay, but also I have another framework in my mind. So kids are in that developmental stage, especially ages 3, 4, 5, 6, where they are really learning to categorize everything. And they're going to have a lot of categories. And one that they're going to be exposed to, whether we like it or not, is healthy and unhealthy foods.
Sure.
Right? We can't stop them from being exposed to that, but we can give them another framework that they can also use. And so they're like, okay, well, there's this healthy, unhealthy framework out there, but there's also this framework that says, oh, a food is only unhealthy if you're eating only that food. It's more complicated. And I've seen my kids kind of develop this. So when my son came home and was like, oh, my classmate said that chocolate is bad, he was already thinking, well, we don't talk about foods as good or bad at home. And so we could have a conversation. Well, what would happen if you only ate chocolate? It would be bad. And what would happen if you only ate broccoli? Well, that would also be bad. And so, every year he's come home with something from school. Now, when it gets to adults, I think it's a little more tricky, especially relatives and holidays where people are talking about their diets and they're talking about their weight loss or attempted weight loss or lack of weight loss or we've heard
name it.
You're like, okay, can we just not? I think there's two things. One, in the moment, it's really hard to know what to say. I certainly have not come up with brilliant things to say in the moment. So if something comes up and I can't react, which is almost always, I would then have a conversation later if my kids seem to be paying attention. Like, oh, did you hear what she said? What do you think she meant by that? Or, oh, it's interesting that she said that negative thing about her body. If my child is interested and seems to be engaged, sometimes we just let it go, right? But I think also taking opportunities to then teach kids positive ways of looking at their body, where we're getting away from shape and size. I mean, that's like the number one, right? We're not talking about people's body sizes, not our own, not their. We're not talking about body shape, whether it's big or small. Like, we're just not doing that. We have the rule, like, you're not allowed to talk about somebody else's body to them or comment on it unless, you've asked them or they've asked or something like that, So, and I think the other key is really to call ahead. Like, call grandma on the phone. Hey, grandma, please do not talk about your diet around Johnny. And I know this can be really, I say it like as if it's easy to call up grandma and ask her not to say anything about her diet around your child. It's not. None of this is easy. And I think sometimes as parents, we just have to say, okay, I'm going to do this really hard, awkward thing, and grandma may be really angry at me. And I still have to do it. Like, sometimes we still have to do those really, really hard things. And I think calling ahead, you can decide, how does grandma like to be contacted? Text, video, in person. If you call ahead, you can talk to grandma in the best way possible for her. And then you can also contact her at a time when she's most likely to be in a good mood, as best as you can, right? And then you're being very specific. You're like, and you're talking about your child. You're not talking about grandma. You're specifically talking about your child. Like, Claire is really
Sure.
We're working on Claire having a good relationship with her body, and we need you to, we need her to not hear anything about this. I am happy to listen to your diet. Now, you may not be happy to listen to her diet, in which case you don't have to say that. But if you're going to be okay with that, and it's not going to, mess up your relationship with food, you can say, you can tell me about your diet at a different time. You can tell me now, you can tell me after, you can tell me when she's playing outside, but please do not talk about your body or her body or what she's eating or whatever the issue is when she's here. And be really, really clear with this request.
Yeah, that's helpful. And, it makes me think too about us getting centered and grounded in where it is that we can advocate for our kids with regards to this topic. And I know that was a learning curve for me, was figuring out where I could respond to schools, for instance, like knowing that I could email the school nurse on the first day of school and say, hey, by the way, I want to opt my kids out of weight checks for this year, and be proactive about that. But if we don't have these conversations, then people don't always know that that's an option. So do you have other tips for how parents can create a more supportive, inclusive environment for their kids at school?
Yeah, I actually worked with some teachers and eating disorder therapists to create a nutrition toolkit for parents, because what we're hearing constantly is my kid is learning about healthy and unhealthy at school.
Yeah.
And again, we can't keep kids out of this. I think at one point I thought, well, if we can give kids a different framework, they're not going to absorb this healthy, unhealthy framework. I thought that until my kid came home and was like, hey, mom, is this a healthy food? And I was like, what? Where did this come from? I never taught you this. I'm looking at my husband. He's looking at me. He's like, which one of us did it? Like, neither of us. They're going to be exposed to it. I used to think, oh, if you raise them to not think of foods as different, like the candy and the broccoli would be on the same playing field. They're not, because when your kid is 5, they're going to go to gymnastics and they're going to reward the kids with candy. And all of a sudden they're going to be on a different playing field. So I think being grounded in reality is really important, because just like we don't want to have a black and white perspective of food, we also don't want to apply a black and white perspective to what is happening, say, in school.
Yeah.
Because that's also setting up the teacher or the school for failure too, because they're dealing with a lot. They have a lot of things going on. Mm-hmm. And so what we hear from families is they're learning healthy and unhealthy. And so we can tell parents, first of all, yeah, that's probably not the most helpful thing, but also it's not going to completely wreck your child.
Yeah.
Your child's going to hear this anyway. So, whatever. But if we can give teachers a different perspective, then it would be helpful. And I really believe, and research supports the idea that kids benefit from factual information, like information that they can use. This would look like carrots help you see in the dark. Like, that's interesting to a child. I'm not going to sit there and explain that they have beta carotene, which turns into vitamin A, which helps their night vision, right? I'm not going to explain that, but I can say carrots help you see in the dark, or bread helps you run fast, or chicken helps your muscles grow, or things like this. When we give kids information that they can use, what we are teaching them is different foods are going to do different things in our bodies. And we can tell them a cookie gives you energy. We don't have to draw distinctions and make these into categories of healthy and unhealthy. And to help parents, help teachers take a different approach, if they can, we created a curriculum, a unit study that is based on colors. So what do red foods do in your body? What do orange foods do in your body? Yellow, I'm not going to go through the rainbow here, but it's based on the idea that different colors are going to do different things in your body. And the more we learn from a nutrition science perspective, the more we know that those different colors really are the magic. They're the things that feed your gut microbiome. They're those different, they're called phytochemicals. if you want something. But those different chemicals in the foods that make them the different colors are what really make foods different from each other. And so we can give kids that understanding. Hey, different colors are going to do different things in your body. We're not just going to eat cookies, right? I mean, you don't have to say that, but we're not just going to eat cookies because that's one color. And we have, all these different colors. So that is what this unit study is based on. And it's also accompanied by, emails, scripts, like how do you contact your teacher? I think the trickiest thing with approaching teachers is when something has happened with your child, such as, the teacher saying, hey, your food is unhealthy. You can't bring muffins to school. And we do hear that a lot too. We have a lot of messages coming in, parents saying, they just told my child that their lunch is unhealthy. Like, what's wrong with a muffin that I made at home? Or I want them to enjoy a piece of candy with their lunch every day. And this is how we're helping our child have a really good relationship with food. And in those cases, you do have to contact the teacher and very, very respectfully say, hey, this is what my kids need. Can you help me understand, what are the rules in the classroom? What's going on? How is, why is this happening? And also either saying to your child, hey, I don't know why your teacher has this rule, but she does. And there's some places where we can eat certain foods and some places where we can't. This is not an unhealthy food. I think sometimes we're afraid to correct the teacher or the parent, to our child and say they're wrong. Sometimes it's appropriate to say, you know what, that's what she said, but this is what our family believes. We believe that this is healthy for you. This piece of chocolate is healthy. It's so healthy for us to be able to enjoy a piece of chocolate without guilt or even a second thought, really, to just enjoy it. And so sometimes we have to get involved with our kids, as well as asking the teacher, not to say anything to your child if they can help it.
And to your earlier point, it's just another fact that you then explain to your kid. At school, there is this rule. And so to be respectful of this situation that we go to, this place we go every day, we're going to follow that rule. And when we're at home, we don't have that rule. And here's why. Or that guideline, maybe rule is not the right word, but
right.
And I also appreciate your point that we're doing this in a really respectful way, because I know for folks who are working on their own recovery or who are in recovery themselves, sometimes it's hard to approach somebody else and advocate on behalf. Maybe we're feeling timid about it, but maybe we're going in swinging because there's this fear of what will happen if we don't. And so having those templates or those language suggestions available takes a little bit of the anxiety out of approaching that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we always have to remember people are doing their best.
Yes.
I like to assume the best. I like to assume the best of the teachers and the adults. Most people aren't in it to give your child disordered eating, right? And your child is going to be exposed to a lot of things. So when we can actually relax and say, okay, my child is going to learn about healthy and unhealthy foods at school. I think we just need to acknowledge that reality. So the question is, how am I going to stay calm about it? How am I going to approach it when my child does have questions about it? How am I going to not demonize the teacher or the friend or whatever, because chances are somebody's going to tell your child their food is unhealthy. I mean, my kids have had it happen so many times. I'm like, their school doesn't even allow candy. I'm like, you just had some chocolate chips in your muffin. How is that?
Yeah.
I don't know how that's.
Yeah,
so we're going to have these conversations, and it is tricky.
Yeah, and the resources as well on how to talk about nutrition, because on the other hand, as some people feel concerned about creating too much of a focus on nutrition or then their kids become fixated on this, and it also turns into disordered eating. And so I like that there's evidence-based guidelines that say, carrots help you see in the dark, or if you're a little bit older, we can tell you about this other element and, deepen it from there, kind of peel the layers back, but in an age appropriate way.
Right. And I like the distinction between fixating on nutrition and not, because this is an area where yeah, if your child all of a sudden is like reading labels and is really obsessed with what are the foods that help you see in the dark, and then they only want to eat foods that help you see in the dark, or they only want food, they don't want to ever have foods that are just for fun or things like this, that is a sign that it's time to step back and say, you know what, maybe talking about what's in food is not a good thing for us right now. And that's okay too. There's plenty of research that supports the idea that kids don't have to learn what's in food. In fact, I wish that we didn't have to do any nutrition education. I think the reason we do is because they are getting all this diet culture, nutrition stuff, and we need to provide them with facts that are actually solid. But if for you or for your child, it is problematic to discuss what is in foods, even what they do in your body, it's perfectly okay and even justified in research literature that you can pull back and not say anything. And I'm in the process of writing a book, and there's research that supports just about any position that you could possibly take. And I think when we're thinking about how to do things in these tricky areas, like restricting sweets or allowing as many sweets as you want, or how to talk about food or pressuring kids, things like this. These are all touchy, and they can feel very scary.
Yeah.
I think we need to come back to ourselves and think, what is best for me? Because we have such a huge impact on our kids. How we feel about food, how we are coming to mealtime, the stresses we have. It's really important for us to be as healthy as possible. So if you're like, hey, talking about nutrition with my kids is really not good for my mental health, don't do it. It's fine. And if you're like, actually, talking about nutrition with my kids is so helpful for me, then do it, right? Because your kid, they share some of the genetics, like, all sorts of things, and they may end up being a little bit like you. Of course, you never know, but it is one of those things where you showing up as best as you can is going to have a good impact on their nutrition and health. Even if it's like, oh, well, I didn't get to tell them about all the, have those nutrition conversations. That's okay. It's perfectly okay. You are not going to ruin your child by doing or not doing any of these things, truly.
Thank you. And congratulations on your book that's going to be coming out. When can we expect to see that?
I'm not exactly sure yet, honestly. But I did write a free guide on the 9 simple steps you can take to help your child have a good, solid relationship with food. It's really useful, and it kind of summarizes a lot of what I'll be talking about in the book. And then I'll be sending out, monthly emails just with thoughts on helping kids have a relationship with food. So if anybody's interested in that, kidseatincolor.com/cookie is the website. You can get it free there. And then you can also I'll also announce the book via that email list.
All your platforms.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe we only have a couple minutes left here, but there is one other question I did want to ask, and you touched on picky eating a little bit. So I just want to ask for our community, because the question does come up a lot, is when would you recommend, what is picky eating and what is more towards ARFID or towards a place where we would really want to follow up with a specialist?
Yeah. So I have created a screener to help parents decide, is this something more or is it not? It's not going to diagnose anything. It's not going to diagnose ARFID, but it is going to take you to the point of we need to do something, or this is kind of borderline. And do you have any other red flags that might suggest this could get worse? If your child is losing weight or has any major nutrition issues, for sure, contact a provider right away. If your child's list of food is shrinking dramatically and we're down to 15, 10, 5 foods, that is not typical. Checking in with a healthcare provider is going to be really helpful. If you have a gut feeling that feeding your child is way harder than other kids and you're struggling, it's probably something. Now, whether it's into like a very extreme situation or not, it may or may not be. But that's why I created the screener, to give parents a little more foundation of, what they're dealing with.
That's great. And we tell people too, if you have that gut feeling that anything is going on, that is the point at which you can reach out for support, because it is there. That's why ANAD's here, and that's why resources like Kids Eat in Color exist too. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was really great to connect and meet you.
You too.
All right. Thanks so much, Jen and Jennifer. That was an awesome conversation to listen to. So I really appreciate you both coming on and sharing with us. We're going to go ahead now and keep the day of conversation going. I'm going to go ahead and get John and Brian pulled up here. All right. Hey, guys. How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good. First of all, everybody out there, you don't need to adjust your screen. There really are 3 men talking about eating disorders right now. So it's something that we need to be talking about more. I've shared it time and time again, but I have battled an eating disorder myself. So it's very important that we get out there and break through the stigmas and the stereotypes so that men can get the help that they need when it comes to eating disorders, but also just mental health in general. So I will go ahead and let both of you introduce yourselves. John, you're up on my screen first, so I'll let you take it away.
My name's John Ogrodnichuk. I'm a professor of psychiatry at the University of British Columbia and the director of the UBC psychotherapy program. And relatedly to our conversation, I also founded the men's mental health resource Heads Up Guys.
Awesome. Yeah, and Heads Up Guys is actually one of the first places where I shared my story. So
that's fantastic.
It's really cool to have you joining us today, because it was the first place where I'm like, hey, guys can talk about this stuff and it's okay. So yeah, thank you for the organization. And Brian, would you like to go ahead and introduce
yourself? I just want to say
yourself?
Heads Up Guys is a wonderful organization, and I've been there many times looking through all of your site and all of your work, it's so nice to be able to be here with you as well, John.
Thank you.
My name is Brian Pollock. At all times, I have a bubble connected to my head saying eating disorders in men. And I'm also a professor at Yeshiva University in Manhattan. I teach eating disorders, clinical applications, as well as diagnostic tools. And I own a company called Hilltop Behavioral Health in northern New Jersey, where we serve men and women. I'd say we're one of the few outpatient centers that serves about 50% of our clientele is males. I've also previously was on the board of the National Association for Males with Eating Disorders, and I advocate quite a lot. I used to have a TV show in Pennsylvania called Minding Men that can start up at any time, but at this time I'm a little on hiatus as we continue to grow here at Hilltop.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brian. And it's some of your videos too that were also very beneficial to me in my recovery journey. And I got to give a shout out to Hilltop today for helping sponsor this event and making this day a conversation possible. So thank you so much for that. We'll go ahead and just dive right in. I kind of talked about it here at the top, but there's such a stereotype that eating disorders only happen to young, skinny females usually. Men aren't even part of the conversation. So I'm curious, in both of your works, what are you seeing in terms of men battling eating disorders right now?
John, you go first.
Okay. Well, the guys that I'm exposed to a lot, being on the campus of UBC, we're a huge institution. We have about 60,000 students, and so a lot of young guys on campus. And it's really interesting with this cohort. Here are young adults. They're going through a really important transition in life, becoming independent adults, discovering their sense of self in so many ways, their identity, who am I, where am I going in life, what am I doing, relationships, and discovering, what it's like to be in relationships, what kind of relationships, their own sense of self as far as sexual identity even. And a lot of people are, a lot of guys are in this space is like, I don't really know what I am, or a sense of self about who I am. I'm here because that's what I was told I was supposed to do, either by parents, teachers, society, and they're a little bit in a lost space, and in a really important space that they a lot of them struggle with is with regard to relationships. And it's like, how do I position myself to stand out from the crowd in a way and attract a partner? And that's one of the ways. So lots of guys go to the gyms, they're always working out, and to the point it becomes not a good thing. But the ones that I see in my practice, it's something very different. And it's uh, sort of a ubiquitous kind of issue that a lot of the guys that I see, it's this sense of not being good enough, my not good enough self. And disordered eating can be reflective of that in different ways. One, where they kind of punish that not good enough self by through deprivation, and it's like, I'm not going to eat. I don't deserve to nourish myself. I'm not good enough for that. And they're really harsh on themselves. The way I look at, and they can be very, very thin. And I know you guys see this more than I do, I'm sure. And it's like they're never good enough. I'm always, there's too much here, too much there, and they have to deprive themselves. And somehow they have this idealized picture in their mind of what they need to be in order to be good enough. And it can go in the other way too, where it's these young guys going to the gym, they're always working out, they're trying different ways to create, in a way, what I called it, their armor. This is going to protect this is going to protect me. No one will be able to see the real me. This is my shield. And the bigger I get, the tougher I look. It keeps people at a distance. They can't really see the real me. But again, it's insatiable. What will be good enough? There is no good enough. And so it's just that they become addicted, if you will, to the gym, getting more buff, looking more tough, as a way to project this image that they're strong and capable, but inside really hiding that sense of self, that they're fundamentally flawed in some way.
And 1,000,000%, I'm just going to jump on top of that and say, yes, you just spoke everything that's true. And we see that all the time. The thing I think that's so interesting on that not good enough and the need to always sculpt ourselves and create a sense of balance within, let's say, the homogeneous stereotype of being a man in our current society, which is not creative, not weak, never vulnerable, strong, lean, smart, leader. Think about the words the kids are using nowadays: alpha, sigma, riz. Those are masculine words. Those are masculine contexts. And if you're not within those, and mind you, everyone's using them, I don't have enough riz. I'll say it right now. And the fact is, when you're looking at all this, right? I have a kid. He talks about this all the time. He tells me to stop. He yells at me all the time. But the cultural context of where this is coming from, I hate to say it, it's a monster. It's very hard to stop it. And so to change that culture completely, particularly in our current political and universal climate, is going to be quite hard. So we're seeing these experiences where people are trying to live in contexts where they're being policed by other men, right? So if you aren't good enough, you are kicked out of the tribe. If you are seen as weak or you're not smart enough, you are kicked out of the tribe of manhood. If you are not sporty enough, going back to, I don't know, kindergarten, first, second grade, you are not part of the tribe. And so there's this constant need to always not only be policed, but be policing ourselves within these contexts of what safety is and masculinity is, which includes body. It all gets projected onto body, as well, of course, with mental health, which is the perfect storm paradigm that we're talking about here. So when you trigger all of this, particularly with nutrition or lack thereof, it turns into a storm. So there's a lot I could say. I think that what John is saying is very right. We are seeing contexts of young boys with selectivism to a point where they just want to be lean and very, very thin, binging on proteins and working out all day, to even just more sensory issues. Now we're seeing a lot more ARFID, right, where people are selective, and we're seeing it now more and more with the adult population. But where this stuff really starts to show is in transitions. We're seeing it in elementary to middle school, into high school, into college. Each transition seems to bring about a loss of sense of safety, which then all of a sudden creates a need to make sure that we do not offend the policing. And it only gets worse.
Such a critical issue that you brought up, that sense of wanting to be accepted, finding your tribe. And that's a fundamental human need. Human beings are social animals. We want that connection. We need that connection. And so appropriate what you said, those times of transition, we're looking to be accepted, to find our place within a group, and feeling the pressures of conformity to what we need to do and be to belong.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And those were all things that really resonated with me in my personal experience. I often share the story of when I was in second grade and I was stung by a bee on the elementary school playground. And I wouldn't tell anybody because I didn't want to come across as a crybaby or have that man card revoked or any of that. Already at second grade, that mentality was in my mind, and I was thinking that the other boys would pick on me then, or I would be kicked out and I wouldn't belong, I wouldn't be good enough. And already the seeds were just planted, at that young age, and they only get worse as we get older, and more things are kind of compounded onto it. So how do we get across to boys and to men? How are we able to break through some of that stigma and be there to support them or to help them get the resources that they need? Because oftentimes we talk about the guys going to the gym all the time. They probably get the same response I gave. I'm doing the right thing. I'm being healthy. This is what you're supposed to do. But unfortunately, it gets to a point where it's not healthy any longer. So how do we break through to them?
Brian, you want to take that? Yeah.
I'll start with it. How about that? You take the next part. I think that's one of the hardest, most difficult things. That's why John has his organization, Heads Up Guys. That's why I had the Minding Men's component. I have found it's not even okay to outreach men, because it's a problem if they're seen talking to somebody like us. So you don't want to go to the dark corners of the world, because that's not what you do. So where do you find it? I think you actually have to be a trailblazer and push back and just say, I'm willing to talk and I'm willing to challenge this. We're seeing more and more guys calling because we have male clinicians. That's important. Guys, speaking to guys, and sometimes we open up to women, sometimes we open up to men, and it's very hard to have guys who represent what it is to go through this struggle, or to speak to the pain and the suffering and the safety seeking of something mental health wise. These other companies have tried doing this with, Michael Phelps and other people, and that's on such a mass scale. They're not really getting to the nitty gritty of eating disorders. There's also other things like the LGBTQIA community that probably has more access to having these conversations and getting into more of those communities. That's absolutely possible. There was one other piece I wanted to mention, and I'm losing it, so that sucks. But the the idea of being able to offer the support. I know what it was. It's linguistics. This is one of my things I'm starting to research now, and it's really hard to find. The problem is also in therapy. No guy wants to go to therapy that's dealing with masculinity concerns or who am I concerns, and I need strength concerns, that wants to go into a room and somebody goes, how are you feeling today? Were you sad? No guy wants that, right? So we have to have a new language. And it's hard. There's not a lot of linguists out there in the world, but the language of therapy to help men is too feminine. So we need something. That's why when I talked about men at the gym, they're sculpting. There's a reason. It puts them in control. Men don't talk about bulimia. Why? Or binging. Why? because if they lose control, they are seen as not acceptable and policed and weak. So men don't lose control. So we need to find words and linguistics that actually can reach these guys in a therapeutic way that allows them to be able to enter the room.
So many great things you touched upon, Brian. Fantastic. It's so interesting. 2 days ago, I was doing a podcast with a mental health podcast in Ukraine, and lots of stuff going on there. A lot of guys coming back from the battlefield in not a great place, and they're wondering, how do you connect with men, especially these kinds of men? And one of the big things we talked about was language, and it's like, and what you said was music to my ears. It's exactly the same thing that I talk about. You need to be real with guys. They need trust in order to open up, and our language is one of the critical ways that we create trust. They need to feel resonance with us. They need to understand that we get them, even through language, and being able to just be authentic with them and just use normal everyday language. And I say, I I use the word shit a lot in therapy. It's probably the most versatile word in the English language, especially when it comes to guys. And you just go with it. And if a guy is starting to open up and he's sharing something and might be shameful of it, and it's like, man, that really sucks that you had to go through that. And it's like, oh, you get me, you understand me. The last thing any therapist will want to do is to push off their client, their patient, with language that doesn't connect with them. And if you get a guy who's coming in, sitting down, and you say, tell me how you feel, use a really low tone and almost um tentative. It's like, it's going to put them off. It's going to give them an impression that you really don't get them right now. This doesn't connect with me. The control piece that you said, and I put it in their court, and I said, this is going to be tough. It's probably going to be the toughest thing you've ever had to do, but don't worry, we're in this together. We can do it. But you're the captain of the ship. I'm
Yep.
not going to tell you what you must do. I'm not going to tell you how to be. I'll be with you through this, but you really take whatever we do here, and this is your show to own.
Yeah, they need that control.
Yep.
Yeah, totally. Throughout my recovery, it was very important that I felt empowered the
Yeah.
entire time. And my therapist did a great job of working with me on that. And it was so crucial too, because he got to know who I was. We would go in there sometimes in the first half an hour of a session, we'd be talking about sports or my hobbies or my interests, and we wouldn't even talk about anything eating disorder specific, because he was establishing that trust with me and helping me feel empowered in the conversations. And that's kind of how I lead our men's peer support group here at ANAD now. Is I've got to be very gentle, because if somebody's brand new to the group and has never attended before, if you set in with the how are you feeling tonight, or let's open up and talk about our emotions, they're going to keep that camera off and they're never going to come back again. But if we just let them kind of dip their toe in that first time and get to see that this is a safe space where we can all share and talk and support each other, they're more likely to come back for future meetings. And eventually they go from having their camera off to, leading the conversation. So it's really cool to see that progression, but it's definitely something, especially with men, that you can't force. You've got to let them kind of have that control and be able to navigate the conversation and the journey together.
Another thing that, picking up what you touched upon a couple times, Brian, is oh, see, I lost my thought. Welcome to the club, by the way.
Part of it, right?
Forgetting, yeah.
It is.
but it's when you're working with men and men working with men, there is that aspect of being given permission by another man to share, to be authentic. I like using the word authentic rather than vulnerable, because for a lot of guys, it has a connotation of weakness that's just too much for them to even use that word. But often when we're using that word, we're just talking about being real. and just being your real authentic self. And so when and it's not like every guy needs another guy, but a lot of them do want to work with another man. And I think that particular working context does give the opportunity to be with another man and say, hey, dude, it's okay to feel this way. It's
Right.
all right. And it's like, really? I I can share this kind of stuff and it's all right. I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to be rejected, ridiculed, or whatever. And that permission is so important. It really is.
Yeah, it's everything, and it takes time to get there, you know? I've found there's some wonderful quintessential work done by a gentleman out in Yukon, Mahalik, and can't remember his last name, the gentleman at Yukon, around men gender stereotypes and roles. And there's one piece that therapists really push back against that speak to this a lot, which is the idea of men connecting with men. For a lot of people, that's not acceptable. Men are not even taught that. So how do we as clinicians and how do we as patients or clients or men seeking help without even being able to verbalize it actually make that match and that connection? And there's rules to it, and it's weird. We run a group here at Hilltop. We run a free male eating disorder, actually just a free men's group. It's not even eating disorders, just free men's mental health group since June of 2021 for free. It has never been canceled. It's been going on for what, almost 4.5 years now. And it's been wonderful because the guys in there get it. And we have found that we have to poke fun at male stereotypes a little bit sometimes, where it's always run by two clinicians. So I'll make a joke about the other clinician and he'll throw one back at me, or somebody I already know will make a joke that's very nice. And then we learn that repartee, and men open up differently. Sometimes they need, depending on the guy, they need to poke fun because that's how they've been taught to deal with being connected and accepted. Then you can build and break down those curtains and barriers that are in the way and build it. But there's always this like unsettled, weird first 5 to 10 minutes where everybody's trying to figure out how to communicate and get it because there's a language and a lack of connection and a lack of openness, and the authenticity is there, but how do you keep it in the room? We have to make jokes. We have to say stupid things about ourselves. It's what we do. It's what we've been taught. And I don't think therapists particularly know how to do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes I'll say, "Oh, here, this is how we'll go," because dudes don't talk face to face
Right.
when we're talking. It's
Right.
like,
Yes.
so, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I think most guys recognize some of the ridiculousness in, the things that we do to be a man. We know on the one part, this is kind of what you do to be part of the club. We were talking about that earlier, but how it keeps us from developing the kind of relationships that we really want.
Mhm. Even particularly at home, right? How many of us had, and our parents are wonderful, but how many of us have had a different type of role model than what seems to be what we want nowadays, right? Our parents were under different duress and different stress back in the days, different ways of parenting. For goodness sake, they didn't have to be on top of us. In fact, they had to be reminded that we were even around at 10 o'clock at night. So there's a piece of this where the intensity of how we connect at home requires more authenticity than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, getting back to your point about sort of the masculine norms that we need to uh, conform to, it's really important in therapy and beyond, of course, to think about not masculinity as a singular entity with these very well-defined, circumscribed proscriptions and prescriptions, but think of it in more of a plural way, is that I can feel like a man. I can feel masculine in different ways in different situations. Sometimes it might align with more that traditional where I'm feeling I'm taking a strong stand on something, taking control, um, being perhaps stoic about some things because that's what the situation calls for. And then other times being very tender and empathic and compassionate. but still feeling that I'm being very much a man in this situation because it aligns with my sense of self as a man that I like to care for people in my life.
Yeah.
And that's the way I show care. That's
Yeah.
the way I can feel manly.
And I love that. And it's so real. And imagine the fact of not allowing ourselves to access that, just that diatribe you just mentioned can be the cause of anxiety and depression and triggering trauma and bipolar disorder and other underlying things. Forget about the eating disorder. There's other stuff going on too, right? And it's
Mhm.
literally the lack of being able to connect or be that kind of person that's actually we're seeing the symptom as anxiety and depression and everything due to the constriction.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, when one of the first presentations I gave, one of the questions they asked me was, how do I feel about toxic masculinity? And I responded back that we define toxic masculinity when we start to apply these stereotypes to each other. If we take that more plural view of the term, we realize that each one of us is masculine in our own ways. There is nothing set in stone that says you have to follow X, Y, and Z in order to be masculine or to be a man. And it's when we start to try to put men into these little boxes, that's when it can become toxic. But for some guys, they're just going to be a little bit more stoic. They're going to be a little bit more reserved. That's just naturally who they are. For other men, they might wear their heart on their sleeve and be a little bit more emotional and speak up. That's just that we're all human. We're all different. So you can't apply one term and just expect that it's going to apply to 50% of the
Yes.
population.
Well said, Jason. And I personally despise the term toxic masculinity because it implies that there's something inherently wrong with masculinity. It's the fact that really what we're talking about is that for some guys, they can kind of be on the extreme end of the continuum with some aspects of masculinity that are maladaptive for themselves or others. But it doesn't mean that masculinity has some toxic element to it. And it's like underneath those behaviors that we're pointing out and saying that's toxic, there's a lot of pain and hurt there. It's just unfortunately the way it's coming out is not good for them or perhaps the people that are around them. But there's some real pain there.
Yeah, big pain, ridiculous amount of pain. And mind you, regarding the experience of body image connected to all this, to keep it in the eating disorder vein and the real pain, body image is really just a context of which people feel the authority to place their own judgments onto other people in order to feel different and safe in their own worlds. So when you look at stigma, racism, prejudice, body shaming, when you look at all kinds of different subjugations that people create in their minds to make them feel better in the world, which is an automatic, actual psychological thing we do. It's nothing we can stop, but we have to be aware of. It's something that actually, that's where body image is coming from. It's the fear that people are actually continuing to create further judgments on our body that are in a patterned way that make us pinpointed into a certain aspect we do not like.
And the terrible pain that emerges from that, that's
yeah,
Yeah.
that's everything.
Yeah. And we could just keep this conversation going. This has been amazing to have the opportunity to chat with both of you today. And I hope it's only the start of these types of conversations. I'd love to have you back on and we just keep this thing going. We could turn it into a series here. But John, would you like to go ahead and just share a little bit more about Heads Up Guys before we wrap up here and see if anybody wants to get involved or share
Sure.
their
Well,
story?
thanks for that. Yeah, headsupguys.org. It's an online men's mental health resource. There's a lifetime of information on there about how to help oneself or help somebody in your life who might be struggling. We have lots of tools and courses on there, self-help information, talk about control. And it's like rather than fight guys' sense of self-reliance as an aspect of their masculinity, let's use it. Like, let's teach them how to be their best selves. And we have a therapist directory. We have over 1,500 therapists that are part of this therapist directory. So if you come to there to the site and you say, you know, I want to start working with somebody, we have the conduit to help connect people with that help.
It's awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And like I said, it was a great resource for me at the start of my recovery. And Brian, if people want to attend that support group, if men out there want to attend that support group or get connected with Hilltop, how
We're
can
just
they
at
do that?
hilltopbehavioralhealth.com. Pretty simple. We also have a link within that. We have something called the Center for Men. So there's actually specific sections that are outlined for men. We're there. I mean, you'll find us. We're the largest eating disorder outpatient center in the state of New Jersey right now. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and I'm sure some of your recordings are still floating out there from the show.
I got to get
before,
back.
so-
Anybody want to join me? I need a co-host.
Hey,
There you go, Jason. That's your call.
all right. Well, thank you both, John and Brian, for joining me today and for being a part of the conversation. And I look forward to talking to you.
care.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. I appreciate you putting this together,
Sure.
and thanks for everything that you do, Brian. It was awesome to meet you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. All right. Looks like we're trying to get Kristen back on here. Just a second. I think I'm clicking at the same time she's clicking. So there we go.
Okay, we managed the clicking situation here.
Yeah. All right, Kristen. Well, we just talked about eating disorders in men, and I know that you've got a great conversation coming up about eating disorders in female
We
athletes.
do. Speaking of another population that needs a little bit of a different approach here and there. I got the chance to talk to Heather Kaplan from Lane 9, who are doing really incredible work, really highlighting menstrual health, menstruating people, athletes, and their specific needs. So I'm going to pull up that recording for us all and let you see what they've been up to. If it wants to come, oh, here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to this next installment on ANAD's Day of Conversation. I am Kristen Portland, ANAD Executive Director, and I am joined today by Heather Kaplan from the Lane 9 Project. And since there's never actually enough time to talk, Heather, I want to jump right into it and ask you to tell us just a little bit about Lane 9 and you and what you do over there.
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks for having us. We're so glad to be here helping out during Eating Disorder Awareness Week. We are focused on improving the menstrual health of female athletes, especially those who are struggling with REDS. And we do that by providing workshops for teams and coaches. We provide resources for athletes. We do a lot of storytelling, which I know we'll touch on here in a little bit, sharing athlete stories through our platforms and our podcast. And we also connect athletes with clinicians and coaches through our directory that we've built out. Our clinicians and coaches specialize in women's health and sport. So we want to make sure that it's really easy for athletes who are struggling to find someone to work with and to build their care team. How Lane 9 came to be was really through shared lived experiences between myself and my co-founder, Alexis Fairbanks. We met in DC in 2016. She was working on a project about REDS and found me through my private practice at the time. My background is in dietetics, and I was primarily working with active women who were experiencing hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is one component of REDS. And it's secondary amenorrhea. It's when a menstruating person loses their period, often due to overexercise or undereating, or the combination of the two. So that was my specialty in private practice. And we got to talking and eventually got to the part of the conversation where it's like, why are you interested in this? And for both of us, it was having experienced it ourselves and wanting to know more about it and wanting to support folks who were going through it. And then we just kind of kept talking and kept coming back to this question of what is something that we could do about this that could help fellow athletes and fellow active women in sports who are struggling and maybe don't know what's going on or don't know that it's okay to ask for help and don't know where to find that help. So we built out Lane 9, not really knowing exactly what we wanted to do, but just knowing that if we talked about it and put it out in the world to try to raise some awareness of HA or hypothalamic amenorrhea and REDS, then maybe something would happen. And something happened. We got a
I
lot of
love
response
it.
to that. Yeah.
That's incredible. And just to back up a little bit for everyone watching, I'm going to throw
Yeah.
some questions at you here. What's REDS? Why is menstrual health important? And why are we talking about this during Eating Disorder Awareness Week?
Yeah, RED stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. Folks maybe know the female athlete triad, which is not a term that is used very often anymore, but used to be pretty commonly thrown around. And eventually the female athlete triad was sort of folded into REDS to really account for the fact that REDS is multifaceted and can impact a lot of different systems in the body, and also impacts athletes across sex and gender, and does not just impact female athletes. So when we talk about REDS, we're talking about a state of low energy availability, which is basically a fancy way of saying that the athlete's not eating enough or is not nourished adequately to support their training or their activity level, or just them as a human, right? We can have low energy availability as a person who is not an athlete, but when we are looking at this within athletics, we're looking at the athlete's fueling practices and habits and whether they're restricting intentionally through some disordered eating patterns or an eating disorder, and or it's a lack of knowledge or a lack of support nutritionally, and they don't really know how to fuel for their sport. And a lot of times there's overlap in all of those things. And when we look at REDS, we're looking at an impact on performance, an impact on immune health, an impact on reproductive health, an impact on digestive health, cardiovascular health. It has so many different areas that it touches on for a body.
So all of the things.
All the things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned specifically disordered eating as well as eating disorders, because I think a piece that doesn't get talked about enough is that it really is a spectrum, right? And for athletes, especially, I think it's easy to underfuel unintentionally, as well as the people who maybe are bringing some of the disordered eating patterns. But for I feel like there's this narrative that people are supposed to hit rock bottom before they get help. Like, oh, I went through all of these things, and then I hit my rock bottom, and that's when I turned around to get help. But I always wondered, like, what if you didn't? Like, what if you got help first, right? Like, what if you realized I'm having kind of a hard time? There are some red flags here. Maybe I should get help for that. Do you see a lot of people in that middle ground?
Yeah, so many of the stories that are shared through our platforms, you'll hear somebody say, it wasn't a full-blown eating disorder, or I didn't have a clinical eating disorder. And what they're sharing, I think, is so relatable to people, and it like breaks my heart a little bit, because what I want to say is that doesn't mean you didn't need support. And the person often who's joining us and sharing the story knows that. And I hope that the person, whoever is listening on the other side, hears it and realizes I don't have to be struggling so much that I need to be hospitalized or be so sick that I can't get out of bed, or, raise all these red flags. It can be that you're struggling with food, that you're struggling with body image, that you're struggling to get through some of the workouts, you're struggling to find joy in the sport again, and that all of these things are actually connected to each other. They're not separate. And I want athletes to hear these stories and to see themselves to be able to see themselves so that they can feel like they can reach out for support and not feel like, oh, isn't this something everyone's struggling with? Right? Which maybe on a certain team it could be. It's certainly a cultural factor in a lot of sports. But yes, disordered eating and eating disorders are very much on a spectrum. And sometimes, depending on what your sources of nutrition information are, or kind of your wellness sources are, it's sometimes hard to see them as disordered. It's easier to see them as quote unquote healthy or quote unquote disciplined. And for an athlete, like there's so much that has to be structured and attempted to be controlled. And so it's easy to kind of get into that environment or get into a team culture where you feel like you're doing all the right things to be the best athlete you can be, but actually you're struggling, and it's okay to get support for that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover between what makes a good athlete and what can fuel an eating disorder, with the perfectionism, the dedication to training, all of these things can have such incredible results for people who are passionate and putting in the work to be excellent at their sport, or even just really keep improving in their sport.
Yeah.
But without that balance, it goes overboard.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
yeah, can you talk more about the cultural aspect? Because I think that's something that's really important to dive into a little bit more. That on a team, if you're surrounded by people who maybe have the same, I guess, misinformation or lack of education as you do, it's harder to spot problems.
Yes, absolutely. And I also think I don't want to speak poorly of coaches too broadly. I know coaches have so much on their plate and they're doing so much work and they're supporting so many athletes, but we do see a lot of harmful norms that are perpetuated by coaches and support staff. A lot of times when we hear stories from athletes on our platform, we hear, well, my coach said this about my weight, or my coach said this about what to eat or what not to eat. And whether the intention was good or not, like it creates a disordered pattern in a lot of athletes. They kind of latch on to one piece of information and maybe take it a little bit too far, but not with malintent, right? They're trying to be the best they can be. They're in a high pressure, high expectation environment, especially if we're looking at someone who's going from high school athletics to collegiate athletics, and maybe from collegiate to pro or to sub elite. Like there are so many changes that happen with each of those transitions that there is what we hear a lot is athletes who struggle to kind of find what's working best for them because they're just looking around and trying to see what's everyone else doing and how can I do what everyone else is doing to try to seem like a team player or seem like they're doing the best that they can to be high performing and high achieving without a lot of information about what that actually would look like. So, yeah, I think we see, a lot of team culture that sort of promotes or perpetuates restrictive eating. There are so many sports that have this aesthetic aspect to them where there is kind of this long held belief that a certain body type is right for that sport instead of welcoming the athlete themselves in the body that they're in and saying like, what can we do to support you to be the best in this sport, whatever that might look like for you. And I think if we had more kind of individualized support for athletes and we had more folks who were kind of ready to support athletes in a way that felt like we want to support you and what that looks like for you, and not just like what does that look like for everyone, because there is no approach to nutrition or training or menstrual health that is going to work for everyone. Each person is so unique in what they need.
Yeah. And we're talking about this from the lens of the running community, but this feels applicable to so many sports.
Yeah.
So I guess from both sides of this then, if you are a coach or someone who has a position of power in the athletic community, how can you be supportive of the folks on your team?
The first thing that comes to mind is kind of knowing what you don't know and being willing to bring in people who can be supportive to your athletes. And then, of course, continuing to educate yourself as a coach. Like I coach runners and I'm a dietitian and I'm always learning new things. Like I have been a dietitian for 15 years and I'm still doing my continuing education every year, right? There's always more to learn. There are ways we can improve as clinicians and as coaches. And I think that again, like bringing in people that can fill the gaps in your knowledge, if you have the resources to do that by tapping into your community or tapping into your network, bringing resources to athletes who may be struggling, just kind of knowing where to refer them out. Again, knowing what you don't know and where your scope is ends and someone else begins and they can help that athlete. Yeah, those are the things that come to mind immediately.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then what about on the athlete side? What can folks do to advocate for themselves if they have like a gut feeling that something isn't right or they're getting advice that just doesn't feel right for them?
Yeah, I think maybe, ideally they're working with a clinician, right? So ideally they're able to connect with a mental health professional and a nutrition professional, physical therapist if that's needed, a medical professional who understands athletes and the unique needs of athletes, especially a menstruating athlete and what's normal and what's not normal for them. Ideally, we can really easily connect athletes with clinicians. But if that's not the first thing that's accessible or the first thing that someone feels ready to do, finding someone you feel comfortable talking to about it, maybe that's a teammate, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a parent or a guardian or a mentor. Maybe it's one of us at Lane 9, like you can reach out to us. We would love to chat with you. I think just finding somewhere that you can say the things out loud and see how that feels and then get some support. I also think better understanding RED-S is going to be helpful to any athlete. Again, it's so multifaceted. It impacts so many different systems in the body. And what we'll sometimes hear is an athlete who will say something like, well, my cycles were a little bit irregular and I was also having a lot of digestive issues. I just don't know what was going on. And as a clinician, you're like, I have some ideas, I have some thoughts. Let me ask some questions and get some more clarity. So I think if athletes really better understood RED-S, and that's not necessarily on the athlete, there are so many places where in a sports system, we could be introducing this education, and it's just not that widely available. There certainly are so many organizations now who are trying to do that work. And of course, we're one of them, and there are many others. But yeah, I think better understanding RED-S, starting to get curious about what feels normal versus what feels really kind of anxiety inducing or stress inducing for the athlete. If they're really worried about food, preoccupied with body image, they're noticing that they have different cycle symptoms than what was normal for them. Knowing what's normal for you is step one, I guess, being more aware of your body and your cycle. And then again, just finding somebody that you can talk to. I feel like whether that's a clinician or if it feels better or more accessible to talk to a teammate or a friend or a mentor, starting there can be really important.
Yeah, just making that connection, I think, helps. And to that point, one of the things that I think both of us put a lot of focus on as organizations, as people, is storytelling. And so I want to pivot now and talk a little bit more about why that's so important and how we've seen it impact people.
Yeah, we have so many folks who come on the podcast or write an essay for us who will say, well, when I was in high school or when I was in college or when I was on this team, we had a dietitian come talk to us and I did not want to listen to what she had to say. And so what I'm hearing is there are professionals, and I know I've been in this position where you come in and you have such great information and the person is just not ready to hear it because it is a like educational setting, right? It is like, I have all this knowledge, I'm going to give some knowledge to you. And I think as humans, what we really need is to be able to see ourselves in the story, in the situation, right? So if a clinician comes in and is saying like most athletes need these things, you don't hear I need these things. And I think when athletes tune into our podcast or they find an essay, and I know this because we get responses that literally say like, that's me. They see themselves in these stories. And so we try to share stories that just have slightly different details. A lot of the big picture is the same, but the details are different. And we don't want folks to go too into detail with too many things that could potentially be harmful to someone reading. But just to say, I was on this team and I was struggling with this performance anxiety, or I wasn't sleeping, or I kept thinking this about my body. And I think when the more stories we have, the more folks who are going to find them and see themselves in that. And of course, like when we share these stories, a lot of times it is kind of after the fact. And so part of the story is I got support. I asked for help. I talked to a coach. I talked to a teammate. And so it gives folks that kind of next step that they're looking for. And I just think it's much more powerful if they are able to relate to the story or to see any part of themselves in the story that's being told. I think that's more powerful than having a clinician, much as I love to be a clinician, coming in and saying like, this is what works for most people. They need to know what's going to really work for them.
I completely agree. And we do a lot of similar work on our end as well. And we have a whole storytelling series of people sharing their stories. And I really love your point about the people who are coming to us are often later on in their journey. So it shows tangible steps. And even in our groups, I lead one of our support groups, so I get to see it on kind of a smaller scale in there, people sharing just pieces of what's going on with them. And sometimes the only thing the group can say is like, I feel you, I've been there. I have felt that exact same thing. And even just that, the relief of knowing like I'm not alone. I'm not wrong for feeling this way. I'm not some unique, strange outlier.
Yeah.
That can be really, really powerful for people. Even if there's not a tangible next step, just knowing you're not alone and seeing yourself reflected in other people's experience is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, the most common response that we get to folks who stumble upon our blog, and these are a lot of times like really old posts that have been up for years, an athlete will find it and they'll email us directly and say, like, I read this post, I'm in this program, I'm this age, like, what do I do next? You know, who should I work with?
Wow.
And it's always really interesting to me that that person, like, resonated so deeply with what they found that they email us who they've never met before. We're not even really a face to them. It is an organization, right? And are asking like, just tell me what to do next. I just want to know what to do next. And I hope that part of what we can do is kind of reduce that mental load for folks who are struggling, who reach that stage where they are ready to ask for help, but there's a gap between like being ready to ask for help and really knowing what kind of help you need.
Yeah. And that takes some agency, right? To identify that, hey, there's something going on. I'm going to go out and do the research. And even to get to the point of finding that post, like that's effort.
Yeah. 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 Wow. So I think, you know, so much of what we do has revolved around storytelling. That was not initially our intention, but it was what happened so quickly was we individually shared our stories and wanted to represent like different levels of athletics. I was never a collegiate athlete. I didn't compete at a high level. I still run and enjoy it so much, but I'm not winning any races. I'm not coming first in my age group ever. It's just not the type of runner that I am, and was still impacted by all of these things, just being adjacent to the sport and a fan of the sport and a follower of the sport. And again, we talk a lot about running, but insert any sport into that sentence. And then Alexis comes in and shares a collegiate athlete experience, which is much more of what we hear in our community. But we wanted to share that you don't have to be competing at a high level to be called an athlete, to consider yourself an athlete. You have to be a person who participates in sports in some way and enjoys it, and it's a part of you and it's a part of your identity, and you want to be able to keep doing that thing. So the way that we launched Lane 9 was by sharing those stories in a personal essay form, and we were so surprised by how many responses we got to that, just from people from her team, people from running groups that I've been in, people from just like different seasons of my life who were like, I want to share my story too. I want to write for Lane 9. I want to do an essay. I want to be on the podcast. Like wanting to, I guess, you know, resonating with some piece of each of our stories and wanting to kind of pay it forward.
I love that. That's really amazing. And I love your focus on including people at different levels and different places in the sport. Like I found running as an adult, and I actually found your podcast when I was looking for resources for myself because I was impacted too.
Yeah.
And I think that piece of it is another thing that isn't talked about enough and folks need some validation on, that an athlete is really anyone who moves their body. Like how you do it, how quickly you do it, how well you do it, I think is secondary.
Yeah.
And it's easy to think like, oh, I don't count because I'm not on a team, because I'm not fast enough, I haven't competed. But if it's having an impact,
yeah,
it counts. You count, and it's worth getting help for that.
Yeah.
Before you mentioned joy, like finding joy in sports. And that's something I've done a lot of work around, and I still love running. I ran yesterday, I'll run today, even though it's cold, because it really does bring me joy. And I think that's an aspect that it isn't separate from being an athlete. I think it should be tied up.
Yeah. Most of the clinicians in our directory will share an intro when they join to the other clinicians and coaches who are in there. And we ask, like, what is your sport of choice, or just sports that you love watching or following, And it's so fascinating to see the different answers. And a lot of times what you'll see is like, well, I played this sport as a kid and then I got into running as an adult. And part of what I keep thinking about in this season of life for myself is like, how do we get back to some of those sports that we played as kids? It's less accessible as an adult for the most part. It's harder to schedule, it's harder to join teams. It's very easy comparatively to put on shoes and go outside and go for a run or a walk or a hike or even a bike ride, right? Compared to like, I join this team and I go to the game at this time and we have practices on these days, and it's a lot more kind of structure that you have to try to fit into your life. But we also hear people say, and I've done this too, I played that sport as a kid, but I'm not good anymore. So that's why I don't do it. And I feel like what I hope we can continue to do through this work is to just kind of remind people like, it's okay to enjoy a sport and not be good at it. It's okay to enjoy movement in any form, sports in any form, and just let it be fun and let it be giving in whatever ways it's giving for you, and not be great at it and not be winning and not be like, excelling in all manners, just to like let yourself enjoy it.
I love that. And it's something I'm doing a lot right now. I'm in a season of life with young kids, one of whom has
Yes.
developed an interest in yoga. So we fall over together and it's the best. Like it is so much fun. Like
Yeah.
neither of us are hopping up doing any of the balances, but we watch and we try and we fall and we laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, just made me think of that.
I love it.
So I guess what would be your message to anyone watching who is thinking like, I don't know if this is me. I don't know if I count. I don't know if I am an athlete.
Mm. I think if you move your body and you enjoy any sport and you participate it in any way, you can consider yourself an athlete. There's no one way to define an athlete. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to have experienced it collegiately. You don't have to be good at it. You can just be a person who enjoys sports. And if that's a thing you want to continue to do, especially as an adult, there's some support that's required, and that's okay. It's okay to need to go to a PT. It's okay to consult with a dietitian. It's okay to get in touch with a therapist. All of these things, if it keeps you in the sport that you love and it keeps you doing movement that's important to you and that you value in any way for any reason, that's okay. We have this directory of clinicians. It's not just for collegiate athletes. It's not just for professional athletes. It's actually primarily for folks who want to be in sport in some way and know that they need support to keep doing it. If this is something that you want to be able to keep doing for a long time, our bodies are resilient, but they also need care. So it's okay to ask for that help and to need that support.
And to kind of loop back around to what we touched on earlier, and a message I really want to like keep putting out into the world is again, you can reach out for support before a diagnosis, before something has gone catastrophically wrong. Like it's okay to get help for the sprained ankle instead of, or along with the broken femur, right? To be metaphorical there, but it, it doesn't have to be as hard as it is. And it takes some self-advocacy, it takes some self-awareness, and it takes the willingness to ask, which is hard. Like I see that and I get it, but it's important.
Yeah, there is definitely a narrative thread through, I think, all sports and at all levels that discipline and hard work and sort of grinding it out are what makes you quote unquote good. But you really can't be good at anything if your body is falling apart in any way, your body or your brain. So if this is a sport or a movement that just feels important to you for any reason at all, getting support is part of what helps keep you active and keep you engaged in that part of your life.
And ANAD is here to support as well. In case anyone is just jumping on the thread and hasn't heard the spiel yet, we have support groups, we have a helpline, we have a mentorship program and a directory as well. although ours does not have athlete specific folks. So you can always check out Lane 9 for that one.
Yeah, we would love that. Yeah, we have our podcast. We have Instagram. We're at Lane 9 Project, lane9project.org. If you want to get in touch, we'd love to chat with you and just point you in the right direction if you need a little help finding what you need.
Heather, I just want to thank you so much for jumping on today. Again, yours was a resource that helped me when I needed it, and I was really excited to be able to talk with you and put out some awareness during Eating Disorder Awareness Week.
Yeah, I love it. This is our, I think, 6th, 7th anniversary. I keep forgetting the years. We launched during Eating Disorder Awareness Week in 2017. 8th? How many years has it been since 2017? I don't know. A lot of years.
Too many.
so many years. My math is not mathing. So yeah, Eating Disorder Awareness Week is definitely near and dear to us. It was when we decided to launch and kind of share our stories and put this out to the world. So grateful to you for reaching out and including us in your resources, and just happy to continue collaborating so we can support athletes.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for continuing to have conversations with us on this, our day of conversation. Now, I am very excited to welcome some friends to the stage. Our next conversation, we're going to take a pivot here and be talking about ARFID. And I've got some members of the ARFID collaborative here. So let's see if I can get everyone in. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
I'm going to organize our screen a little bit, and let's just start by doing some introductions, and I'll just kind of go around my screen. So Vanessa, do you want to start?
Yeah, my name is Vanessa Galliano. I am a speech language pathologist. I work at a children's hospital and I have a private practice. Just briefly, the role of an SLP in working with ARFID, because sometimes people don't know, is we assess for any oral motor issues, any oral motor inefficiencies that might be contributing to difficulty with eating. We also support anything related to like sensory issues, texture issues, providing food modifications to make eating a little bit easier. So that's part of the role of an SLP or an OT in working with ARFID.
Very cool. Thanks for that explanation. And Meg, welcome. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Meg Fraley. I'm a dietitian. I work at a private practice in Denver, Colorado, with 8 other dietitians, working primarily with eating disorders, and ARFID being one of them.
Amazing. And finally, Carolyn, how about you?
Hi, yes, I'm Carolyn Comis. I am a therapist. I'm located in Los Angeles, California. I have a private practice where I serve, it's a virtual practice, so I serve residents in California and New York, and I specialize in eating disorders.
Awesome. Well, all of you, thank you for coming on, and thanks for joining us to talk about ARFID today, because I think it's one that we've been talking about more in recent years. But I don't think it has the same level of awareness as some of the other ones that people might be more familiar with. So, Carolyn, to start us off, could you just tell everyone what is ARFID?
Yeah. So ARFID, or in its full name, Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, which is a lot to say, why we call it ARFID, essentially is a condition where somebody has a limited food intake, and there can be certain components to why there's a limitation in what they're eating. They could be have a sensory aversion, so like texture of a food, taste, smell, the look of it could just throw them off, and then kind of eliminate that from their diet. There may have been, or there is, a fear of something bad happening if they do eat this food. So an example is like someone having like choked on something, may find like foods of that similar texture, they'll always choke on it. And so then they will kind of eliminate that from their diet. And then we also see that there are, within the ARFID diagnosis, some people experience just having like low interest, if not like not feeling hunger. And so it's really hard for them to kind of even like remember to eat, or it feels really hard to eat just because there's just like no motivation, no interest in it. And so this can lead to having nutritional deficiencies, malnutrition. So oftentimes, weight restoration because of falling off growth charts as a child is something that we're working on doing. Um, one of the things that makes it different from maybe like an anorexia diagnosis is that ARFID is not usually driven by the desire to change their body size to lose weight. Not to say that people with ARFID do not have body image issues, like that can still be there, but it's not one of the driving factors of why there is a food limitation or food intake limitation.
Wow. Yeah, so it sounds like even though ARFID is an eating disorder, kind of categorized within other eating disorders, there's a difference in the way we approach it, the way we treat it. Vanessa, what does a good team look like for someone with ARFID?
So that's a great question. So a great team is something that is specific to the individual. So even amongst the three of us, we all serve a different role. And so somebody's team might have one of us, two of us, all three of us. And then there's other providers that are also a part of a team. And it could be a physician, it could be a psychiatrist. So kind of speaking to what Carolyn spoke about, like identifying the driving force of what is really impacting the individual, and also taking into account what they want recovery to look like, right? So for example, as a feeding therapist, a lot of my work revolves around exposure, but someone might not want to work on exposure. They might not want to have a wider variety of foods. So maybe they might work a little closely with their physician or a dietitian to identify what can I work on to make sure that I'm fueling my body appropriately, but maybe not necessarily working on a variety of exposures. And I can give several more examples of a perfect team, but there's so many people involved. Sometimes there's even just like a peer, right? Somebody who has the experience of dealing with ARFID. Eating is this thing that we're constantly pressured to do. And, I think if you enjoy eating, it's something that you don't always think about. But maybe even just talking with somebody, and like, the holidays are so rough, everyone's always wanting me to have the mashed potatoes. Each role is unique, and they really cater to their specific lens. So I would argue that in a perfect world, you would have a little bit of everybody so that you know all the things that you have access to.
I love it. Okay. So then earlier today, we had a conversation with someone from Kids Eat in Color talking about how parents can set their kids up for a healthy relationship with food. So just kind of calling back to that, and something that came up. What's the difference between ARFID and picky eating?
Also a great question. So the thing about picky eating that I think is so important is that there isn't a universal definition for what picky eating is. There are several people that define it, and they define it by number of foods or number of foods within each food group, but there isn't an agreed upon definition for what picky eating is. As a feeding therapist that primarily works in pediatrics, I think that picky eating is something that everybody experiences, right? And it's one of these things where, and I'm talking about kids, but adults are also accused of having picky eating. But it's somebody finding their voice and saying like, hey, I like pizza, but not with pepperoni on it. Or, I like certain things, but I like them to be in a specific way. So picky eating, I consider, especially to be a normal part of development. I want somebody to stand up for their preferences. I want to hear your voice. I might not always be able to accommodate, but I want to hear what your preferences are. So I think the term picky eating has a bad rap. I don't think it's well defined. So now, comparing it to ARFID, and I think Carolyn gave a really great description, this is when the high selectivity is impacting nutrition, it's impacting growth, it's significantly impacting social function. So it's like little Susie can't go to this birthday party because she's going to see pizza, and pizza is going to send her spiraling, and eating before or after is not an option, so she can't go to the party. So thinking about it at a bigger sense. And I also think of picky eating as, kids are going to have their tantrums and we're going to have our preferences. It's when it is significantly beyond what we might expect, or when it's like ruining their whole day or really impacting them or causing significant distress repeatedly. I think that that's when it's no longer picky eating and it's a little bit more problematic.
Meg, what are some of the warning signs that parents can look out for, or adults, if they're kind of considering their own relationship to food? Yeah. And just that difference between, I don't want the pepperoni on my pizza and what's problematic.
Yeah, that's a great question. And kind of to piggyback off of what Vanessa said, like problematic things are really looking at if your child is, or if you have lost weight, or that desire for food has gone down, whether it's from an event, from a choking event or something that traumatic has happened with food, where your intake is significantly decreased. If kids are having nutritional deficiencies, those are problematic things that we want to make sure that we're addressing, and helping the patient, whether it's a child or an adult, like to make sure that they're able to take care of, and working with the team as a collaborative on that. But yeah, those are some of the warning signs.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about just natural preference, right? And how there are, even those of us who have, recovery, great relationship with food, we all have preferences. And I don't know anyone who likes literally every food. So clearly that's not the end goal of recovery for ARFID. But with other eating disorders, you can kind of look at behaviors and, have I stopped binging, purging? Am I more comfortable with that? But with ARFID, it seems like it's going to be different, right? Like what does recovery look like for folks with ARFID?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, recovery, I think, is very individualized in what like the folks want. I think Vanessa kind of like had said really well of like what is going to help in, like if things are distressing, that someone may not become a foodie and like every single food. But if like the work is, I want to be able to go out to eat with friends and be able to have one thing that I can get off the menu, that might be like what we're working towards in their recovery, trying to help alleviate those distressing situations. So yeah, that sometimes I think there's an expectation, I see with parents where they're like, I want my child to be able to eat every single vegetable under the sun and eat it in a particular way. And it might not show up that way. And if we can kind of get, anyone to just like meet some of their nutritional needs, and sometimes it's going to be through vitamins and it's going to be through supplements, and that's okay. But to a place where, yeah, like Susie can go to a birthday party and sit next to pizza, and she doesn't have to have it, but she can sit next to it without having that distressful like anxiety and fear that comes up. So a lot of times it is like asking the patient, what's going to look like a happy, joyful life for you? Where do you see the food playing that piece, and how can we help support that?
We had a question come in from Joyce, who wants to know, can ARFID start in adulthood? And does it wax and wane in relation to anxiety or other life stresses?
I can answer that. Yeah, I think it definitely can start in adulthood. There can be traumatic experiences with food. It could be a choking experience. Those kind of things can definitely trigger it to happen in adulthood. I do definitely believe it can wax and wane. I've seen my patients where when like stress is higher at other parts of life, or anxiety is higher at other parts of life, they tend to start to narrow down a little bit more. because that's a way that can help them feel more in control and feel safer. And so I think it really depends on kind of what's going on for someone. But yes, it can definitely wax and wane. And we also tell patients that that's normal and totally fine, and to have confidence that they'll be able to kind of expand once they're kind of out of that situation.
So for patients, what are some of the barriers that you see them face when dealing with ARFID? Like how can people advocate? Because again, you're talking about agency, right? And like what are your goals? What do you want your recovery to look like? How do you help people push that out for themselves?
I can start. I'm sure both of you are going to have something to add to this too. I think you mentioned it before, like there's more conversations around ARFID. There's still a lot that people don't understand about ARFID. It's a relatively new diagnosis, so I think people are still learning. I think it is often lumped in with other eating disorders. I think a lot of programs some programs might have a your body, my choice. This is what you need to do. This is your only choice. And I think we talked about it a little bit in the beginning where there isn't a right recovery, or there isn't a right, these are the foods you have to have, or this is how you need to perform in society. So I think one of the barriers is from the provider side, lack of information and how to appropriately support these individuals. And so as an individual, you go to a provider and you're like, I need help. They're like, bam, go to this person. And I think, as we mentioned before, there's so many providers. What happens if they're sent to for example, me, and I'm focused on exposures, and they're like, this is the worst thing in the world for me. So I think a barrier is even like you're sent to somebody and then the disappointment of like, that's actually not what I want to work on, or that's not what I need. So it's like the wait lists and the consults and the time. So that's one of the biggest barriers I see with individuals with ARFID. It's informing the providers, but then also the person with ARFID. And I'm sure you guys have more to add.
Yeah. I would say too, kind of on that same line, is like when patients come in and they have these expectations that they're going to, be this adventurous eater, or the parents have that. And, it's so much pressure. And a lot of times that's not what's going to happen, and that's okay. And I think that those expectations can really be such a barrier, because that's what people think they need to do, and that's how they need to eat, and they need to do all these things to meet all the needs of their body. And the reality is our body is really amazing and can do some amazing things to help us navigate that. And we also have other ways to meet all of that stuff with vitamins and other stuff that we can take. So I think that is also a barrier, is like the expectation piece of like, this is what we have to do and how we have to fuel our body to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. And I think, like another barrier, kind of piggybacking on talking about like providers, is that because ARFID is considered more of the newer eating disorder, even though it's been around longer than it was in the DSM, that there are a lot of providers that did not know how to treat, or people were kind of lumped into the other eating disorders and put into treatment protocols that are more suitable for the other eating disorders. And so there have been, I've worked with clients who really have to come into session to unpack some of the traumatic experiences of like maybe not being believed or forced to eat something, or being put into a therapy that just wasn't a good fit, but didn't know, or like even those providers just didn't know, because we didn't have the resources like we are having now. And part of why like ARFID Collaborative came together is so that people can find the appropriate treatment. But that can be a definite barrier for someone to say, like, I'm not going to go back to a provider because they may not believe me or may not hear me.
Is that part of what was the origin story for the ARFID Collaborative? We're off script a little bit here, but I'm so interested.
I think it's part of it, right? We were a group of people who are just trying to find more and more resources between professionals and wanting and realizing that there was just such a lack of ARFID resources out there. So we thought like, well, all of us are working with this population, and what if we could come together to create like a one-stop place for people to find resources. And this is both for professionals to get more training and education, and then for people who are struggling with ARFID to find people who treat it, just to help get that all out there for everyone. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of the origin story.
Awesome. Okay. So now pivoting a little bit, what can self-advocacy look like for the neurodivergent folks? Because ARFID, I think a lot of people know now, neurodivergent folks are disproportionately affected. And advocacy can look different, right?
I can start. I think absolutely. I think that, the world is not necessarily designed for neurodivergent individuals. And so when new protocols are designed, or when new approaches, or when any new treatment strategy is developed, I think that there's often a missing piece to support someone with neurodivergence. And the things that I automatically think of are sensory modulation, right? So our brain's ability to regulate sensory information from the environment. So like, we're all wearing clothes. I'm wearing a little fleece right now. I have a little tag, but I'm able to ignore it. And so really thinking, for example, someone with neurodivergence, they might have a harder time with sensory modulation. So they're experiencing this like wild sensory experience in addition to the wild sensory experience of food. And so I think, the root of everything is always just like the understanding of like, this is really hard for me. And another thing that I think about is, when we eat, sometimes we bloat a little bit. And something that I've noticed a lot with my neurodivergent folk is they don't like the way their clothes touch their stomach when they've bloated. And I have seen so many times this be perceived as like kind of like a classic eating disorder symptom of like something about they don't want their body to grow, but in listening to the individual, it's like the fabric is rubbing on their stomach and they can't ignore it. And so there are certain things of just like things that we can improve, of just like as providers, things that we can consider from a sensory component, from just establishing new routines, or how to look at things a little bit differently, or how to challenge concrete thinking in a way that is gentle and affirming for them, I think is one way that we can improve. But also someone with neurodivergence, sometimes they have to educate the providers a little bit too. And so that's one thing that I think about is like, how can we empower them to do that also?
Yeah, and to piggyback off that a little bit too, is I kind of think of like what I find is most helpful is like making sure they understand and accept, who they are and how they eat, and what that looks like for themselves. Because I find they're then better to able to advocate for themselves and understand and say like, oh, this is fine. This is the way that I'm doing it, even though it's different than how society says that I should eat, or whatever it might be. So really working on my clients of like having them understand and accept themselves and how they're approaching food, or what comes up for them with food, I have found is really helpful for them to then be able to advocate for themselves with providers or caregivers or whoever it might be.
What about the family members of folks with ARFID? Do you do a lot of work with them on what support looks like and how they can do some education of themselves and understanding and support for their person?
Yeah, I think it's so important to educate family members. I think that it's come up a few times in today's talk of like, there may be expectations from parents of my child is going to eat everything, and having to kind of talk to parents about like what their child's diet may actually look like and what the recovery for their child might be. It also can be just as much as it's very hard on the individual who's maybe going through therapy, like if they are doing exposures or we're strategizing finding ways to like get them to eat more, parents can feel that burnout too. And they can feel, sometimes like why, sometimes, the therapy process can be slow and it can be challenging when you're maybe someone you love is in a place of malnutrition and have to be at higher levels of care, like inpatient in a hospital. And so having support for parents is so important for them to have a place to kind of speak out about how they're feeling, or for caregivers too, because that can be really scary, because that can be kind of like the ugly side of a lot of eating disorders is the health complications.
And for anyone watching, later on today, we're having a conversation with some of our friends at Feast, who are an organization specifically for the caregivers and loved ones of folks with eating disorders. So keep an eye out for that. But something else I'm connecting to an earlier talk today is the idea that, providers are looking at folks with ARFID and sometimes putting like the idea that the symptoms are coming from a place that they're familiar with. Like we talked about the stomach touching the clothes. That was part of the conversation of OCD earlier, and really kind of digging into what is the reason behind these behaviors. And it really sounds like something that providers have to be really curious about and really dig into before making any assumptions.
Yeah, 100%. I think there are a lot of diagnoses out there that overlap, and it's important for us as providers to be really curious and inquisitive to really understand the individual, because it could be coming from a place of like, this is the eating disorder, or it could be coming from a place of like, this is OCD, or this is a traumatic response. There's all these things. And that's why, we really talk about the individual showing up in the room and what is the best course of treatment for that individual, because it's not a one size fits all approach. And we really have to, understand our clients and what they're experiencing.
And I think to add to that, I think you don't know what you don't know, right? So in working with so many parents, they're like, yeah, we went on this trip to Italy and we had to pack a whole suitcase of their specific, Purdue Dino Nuggets, and like this, they just kind of function in a, oh, we thought this was normal. And so I think that or even some adults, like, I just didn't want to have those things, or that was just always really hard for me. I thought this was normal. So I always think of you don't know what you don't know. And so supporting people and like, these are some of the options that you have, is a good place to help them too.
I like that. Okay. So now I'm going to pose the question, what is something you want other folks to know about ARFID? Meg, do you want to start us here?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, lots of things. But the biggest thing that comes to mind when I think about the patients that I treat is that, it's ARFID and the recovery journey is so individualized. And that it's okay for it to look very different for everyone, because it is so different. And that if I could say anything too, is like, I wish we could just reduce the shame around that and people feeling very different because they might have, they might approach food differently. So, yeah.
Carolyn, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would like everyone to know that this is not somebody being difficult and that this is a real, like, debilitating disease that really can affect someone's day to day. And it's not just as simple as, like, why can't you just eat that or just get over it? We need to have a lot more compassion for those who are struggling with ARFID.
Vanessa.
I mean, I think that you guys both captured it so well. I think the thing that I tell my clients is I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I think that there's these things that we can address, and they can help you socially. It can help you nutritionally. But I really try to bring it back to there's nothing wrong with you. And a lot of my education really goes to parents too. Carolyn, I think you mentioned like they're not being defiant. And I think what can be confusing is that sometimes maybe they can have the Kraft mac and cheese and other times they can't. So it's understandable that it can look like defiance, but it's all really embedded in this condition. And so I like the compassion piece is something that I think I would really like to echo.
I love it. And I hear all of you just centering the patient's agency and their goals, their values in so much of this. And I think that's a really, really beautiful takeaway for us here since we're about at time. But thank you so much to all of you. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this and doing some education during Eating Disorders Awareness Week.
Yeah. Thank you for hosting this. This is wonderful.
Okay. And if anyone wants to learn more, find some resources, where can they look?
Yeah, I think starting at the Our Faith Collaborative website is a great place to start. We have lots of, like I think Carolyn said, resources on there for patients and clinicians. So that would be a great place to start.
Mm-hmm. All right, then everyone, thank you so much. All right. Up next, we are going to be talking about another diagnosis that is sometimes not understood quite as much as some of the other ones. And with help from ERC, we are going to be talking about binge eating disorder and some of the nuance that comes in to treating that. So if you give me just 1 second, I will pull that up for us. And just before I do, just a very quick reminder for all of us that we are a nonprofit who rely on donations to keep things going. So if you're able, please go ahead and scan that QR code or visit anad.org/donate. If any of our conversations have resonated with you, if you have ideas on where we can focus some time and energy to hold more conversations, help us do that. We would really, really love it. Okay, and as well, if you're feeling lucky today, we have a raffle going on. If you scan that QR code, you can get some tickets and try to enter our raffle as sponsored by Alsana, one of our incredible conversation partners who's going to be up later today. And yeah. Okay. I'm going to awkwardly stare at my screen while you watch for 1 moment while I get our next conversation going. Hey, everybody. Very excited to keep the conversation going on today's day of conversation. And in this next block, I am very excited. We are joined by Alicia Armstrong, the clinical manager at ERC Pathlight, who oversees the virtual binge eating disorder program. And today, we are going to be talking all about binge eating disorder and what makes it different. So, Alicia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for organizing all of this. It's a lot of work, I'm sure, and much appreciated by everybody, I know.
Yeah, it's been really cool getting to do it though. So yeah, to jump right into it, I know it's a big question and this might be, just a perspective here, but from your side, what is different about binge eating disorder in the full landscape of eating disorders and treatment and support? Why is BED unique?
I think there's probably two ways to look at the uniqueness of binge eating disorder. And one of the things being is that a lot of times people can approach it and think that it's so different from other eating disorders. And there are elements that actually aren't. They're so similar to other eating disorders. A lot of people don't realize that most people with binge eating disorder have some component of restriction as well. And so that's just one of those lesser known pieces about binge eating disorder where people might not necessarily consider that because the word binge eating is the predominant term used in that diagnosis. But I would say that there are certain things that are different. You can't necessarily look at somebody and say they've got binge eating disorder. But we do know that a lot of people with binge eating disorder struggle with body image distress in a different way than people with other eating disorders might have. And so their unique experiences with body image distress and And how we treat that might be much more targeted or intensive than in a different eating disorder treatment kind of modality or program. We do find that it's really helpful to have specific binge eating disorder programs that are separate from other eating disorders because of those unique challenges. And yes, there is restriction in a lot of binge eating disorder, people who have binge eating disorder, but it's not necessarily as encompassing as it is for the other diagnoses. And so having a very dedicated special space for people who struggle with binge eating, we find to be really supportive and helpful for our patients.
We actually have a support group dedicated specifically to folks with binge eating disorder that came about after such a strong community need. And I lead one of our general groups, and we see people in there who share all kinds of behaviors, diagnoses, struggles, and they're getting a lot of support. But yeah, we had such a big ask for people to have that space. So we were very happy to be able to share that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've noticed that as well, right? Which is why we have our own separate binge eating disorder track and program.
Mm-hmm. So in that, you talked a little bit about, body image, weight stigma. How do you address that? How can folks maybe navigating recovery, whether early or ongoing, how does that get tied into the ED recovery?
I think each person's experience with their body image and the distress related to that can be so unique. It can carry a lot of heaviness to it with how much it impacts your eating disorder for some people versus others. It's just not as big of a component. And so targeting that is different for each person. But I do think that body image distress with binge eating disorder can be one of the predominant things that leads to a binge cycle. And so being really mindful about addressing that is a huge piece. We also talk about different tools that we can use when we're addressing body image distress, and then how we cope with that, right? How patients would cope with body image distress can often be restriction, which leads to binging because we're hungry, right? We still need the sustenance and food, and the body is asking for it. And so oftentimes there can be this binge cycle that happens. And so I've found that one of the things that I use with my patients with our program is to encourage this concept of urge surfing. Or kind of binge disorder, binge eating disorder. Gosh, I'm so tongue-tied. Binge eating disorder and using urge surfing can be a great way to kind of mitigate the triggers that come along with body image distress. So urge surfing is kind of like what it sounds like. You can even imagine an urge being like a giant wave that you ride along, kind of letting yourself go through the motions until that wave rides itself into flatness. And what it is about predominantly is noticing, okay, I've got a trigger occurring. I can feel myself wanting to engage in some sort of behavior, whether that be restriction or binging or body checking or over exercising, compensatory behaviors, you name it. We found that urge surfing, allowing yourself to say, okay, I'm not going to engage in this behavior right now. I'm going to see if I can go do some other things to ride the wave of how intense it feels to want to go do that behavior. And then see if anything is different. If I check in first about like, how do I feel right now with this urge? Is it really intense? What are my thoughts going through my head? How distressed do I feel? Let me go try surfing this urge and see if I can use some other coping skills and check back in 15 minutes. So instead of saying, just never do this behavior again, this behavior which has become so adaptive for somebody, right? It can be one of the things that's like helping you keep your head above water, if we're kind of using that surfing metaphor. And so it can be really challenging to join a program and say, hey, stop doing this behavior altogether. That's a lot to expect, to just say never, ever again. Well, it's been something that's been helping you to kind of live life at this point. It's been maladaptive, but it still provided some support where you wouldn't be doing it. So using the surfing as a means to say, I'm not going to engage in this right now, but not never. I can give myself permission later, but let me just try some other things right now. That can still kind of provide the comfort of like, I'm not saying I can never use this behavior that helps me to feel better sometimes ever again, just not right now. And starting to see if it makes a difference in how intense the trigger feels.
Yeah, that seems like a really accessible approach too, and a way to really reframe things, right? Totally. I hear from so many people with a really all or nothing mindset. It's not like, hey, I was able to completely stop and I am now perfect. I'm done with behaviors. Hooray.
Yeah.
there's a lot of room between I'm going to start trying and completely done. And I think urge surfing to me feels like a really good way to kind of reframe that, because you're taking time, right?
Yes.
And any amount of time is progress. And that's
Yes.
really a good way to frame it up for yourself. Like, today I was able to surf that urge for 2 minutes. Maybe next week I'll get to 5, like whatever that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a nice way to kind of quantify things too and see if there's any
Mhm.
change. You know, if we do a check-in before we urge surf and then another check-in afterwards, gaining that insight can be so helpful around, wow, yeah, I did do some sort of coping skill that I've learned. And yeah, I actually don't feel I still feel a little bit bad, but I don't feel as bad. You know, any type of shift in developing insight into how we're feeling and how to intervene is a win. That's a success. Absolutely.
I love that. And I'm one of our group leaders, and something that comes up a lot. We sometimes ask people to, like, oh, look for a win from today. And every once in a while we get someone who's like, I just didn't have one.
Yeah.
But showing up
Yes.
is a win sometimes. Just trying, reaching out even when it's hard. That can be such a win. And I really like this tool, because it seems like even just noticing, like there are so many points at which you can have little wins within this tool. I like it.
Absolutely. I often think about eating disorder recovery as not necessarily like an abstinence-based experience. And it's that can be really intimidating, right? Like, I'm just never going to do these things that have been a huge part of my life ever. But rather, it's more about an insight developing kind of process where I'm just learning more about myself and my triggers and my behaviors and why do I do some of these things. And if I can understand why I do them, maybe I can understand what else I can do instead to help myself to feel better, rather than continuing down this path that I know is ultimately really destructive for me.
Yeah. So it's not always all about the behaviors.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. A lot of times it's just learning about yourself.
That can be a really scary thing, but I think ultimately fulfilling.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing that I think is really helpful, that when we're talking about coping skills, something to think about is the idea of practicing them, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not you learn a skill and you go off and do it perfectly every single time immediately. And this is something that comes up a lot too. People saying, like, hey, I tried this and it just didn't work. But, like, okay, how much have you tried it? Did you try it when you were just a little escalated, or did you try to jump right in for the first time when you were having a truly horrible, no good, very bad day, right?
Yeah. I think that that's very clear for a lot of people, that you almost aren't even like called to try a coping skill until you realize you're so distressed. It's like, I need to do something now because of how bad I feel. But rather doing kind of smaller things at the beginning where you notice, yeah, I'm just a little bothered. Let me go try this skill. Or even trying the skill a few times before you really think you need it, just to kind of get that muscle memory down of, yeah, what are the steps that I'm supposed to take? Let me practice that. Because we know that when we are activated and triggered, it's a lot harder for us to remember all the different parts of things that might be required for a coping skill. Or even something as simple as deep breathing. Like, your brain isn't necessarily going to access that when it's overwhelmed. And so having the practice of, oh yeah, what is deep breathing, or what is square breathing? I know how to do that when I'm calm. So it's a lot easier to transfer over when I'm not feeling so calm. That can make a big difference.
What is square breathing?
Square breathing. Square breathing is, if you can imagine a square, and some people do, like, you breathe in for the same amount of time, you breathe out for the same amount of time, you breathe in, you breathe out. Some people do a different variation of that, but all of them are a square. So it helps you to remember to breathe in. Some people like to hold it, breathe out, hold it, breathe in. It really just makes a little square to remind yourself of, like, oh, I'm supposed to breathe in and out. And it's a nice little visual to think about making a square. I think sometimes it's, again, one of those things that's a little bit simpler to call upon than maybe something that's a more complicated coping skill.
Yeah. But again, I imagine even if it's simple, the practice is what really makes it accessible. And using your breathing or your urge surfing when you're mildly irritated, like building
Yeah.
I guess the muscle, like as
Yes.
before you try to jump into a really stressful situation.
Yes. I kind of use a metaphor about like working out a muscle or like building muscle, like you're not going to go to the gym and try to lift like your, I don't know, gazillion pounds all of this the first day that you're there, right? Like your muscles just don't have that. We know that. We know that it takes muscle building to be able to lift things. And so similar to recovery, it's like building a muscle. So yeah, if you go right out the gate trying to use a coping skill in the most overwhelming moment, yeah, that's like lifting a ton of weight above your head the first day you go to learn how to build a muscle. So repetition over time can really build that muscle so that it's stronger, it's easier to call upon, and before you know it, you're picking up 1,000 pounds and throwing it over your head like it's nothing. But that takes time and practice and building that muscle, and your brain is that kind of muscle too, right? Learning how to do all those different things and making it a little bit more automatic than it is having to really think through all of it.
Yeah. I feel like so many people really understand like intuitively, like, okay, you need to build your like physical muscles if you're trying to like get to whatever goal it is. But we just don't have the same grace for ourselves in so many ways when it comes to mental, emotional regulation and building that practice, those muscles too.
Yeah, that is hard, right? Especially because we can often be in a part of a culture or society that's so self-critical, that there's like harsh self-punishment, or even our peers can be really critical of us. And so it is kind of an adaptive thing that we've learned to be harsh on ourselves in order to not be rejected by others. But we take it a little too far oftentimes and become a little too harsh and too mean to ourselves. And that just gets in the way of all the things. So it is hard. It's really challenging. It's not just your own internal critic. It's also the way that society talks about people. And that informs how you think about yourself.
Bringing it right back around to weight stigma.
Oh, yeah. Right on back.
So I guess we're talking about these coping skills and practicing and building up those muscles. For you, and again, throwing another big question at you here, but what is recovery? Is it like having all of these tools, being able to use them perfectly every time? Like what does recovery look like?
Yeah, I think oftentimes it's easier for us to think in black and white. Right? Like there isn't nuance, there isn't gray. It's either I am deep in my eating disorder or I am fully recovered and I never think about any of these things ever again. But that's just not the realistic case about it. I mean, there's such a spectrum of what recovery can look like for each person in each given moment, even. It can look drastically different from day to day, from moment to moment. So it really is unique to each person and how they define their own recovery. But what I consider to be recovery too is if, you kind of pull back and look at the longer timeline of your experience in your eating disorder. Do you feel like you're generally trending in a direction that feels life affirming and supportive and fulfilling? Generally, right? Not like actually in those moment to moment, but over the course of time, if you kind of pull back and look at your journey, do you feel like you've moved in a direction that just feels more supportive for you? And if so, that's a great way to measure recovery, that you're feeling better, that life feels more enjoyable, that you've made progress in some way. But looking at it too narrow and too to like this week or this month can really end up just putting you into that circle of harsh self-criticism and being disappointed in yourself and all of those things that actually can make our eating disorder so much worse because we're being a bit mean to ourselves. And so giving yourself some grace around what your own recovery looks like, I think is really important.
I completely agree. And you mentioned black and white thinking. For so long, I assumed there was like a finish line, right?
Yeah.
Like I would cross it and then past that, everything would be sunshine and rainbows forever. Like I would just be happy at all times, never have negative emotion, never like have to, cope with anything. But that's not life, right? Like life keeps happening and things keep being hard, and finding ways to cope that are life affirming. I think that's what it looks like for me. And I've said this in groups too, right? Recovery doesn't mean everything's easy.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, it can be really hard. I mean, if it wasn't hard, we wouldn't all need to be here, right? Like there's a reason why this is so challenging. And I think being really mindful of the way that you are judging yourself in your recovery is supportive of your recovery. Again, just building more of that insight about the way that you engage with your eating disorder, your experience of food and body and the world, weight stigma, and all of that. Yeah, definitely.
It's all so much more nuanced than just a nice, clear finish line.
Oh, it is so nuanced. Yeah, but wouldn't it be so easy if we could just say, I crossed the finish line of eating disorder recovery and I never have to worry about this ever again?
Done, everybody.
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice?
World record
Yes.
time here.
Yeah.
But man, and I think life really does just keep happening, right?
It sure does.
And we just keep looping around here, but all of these things are so tied together. Like being able to think through the ways we cope with life, with our feelings, with changes. It really is a practice.
Yes. Yeah. And if going back to that kind of muscle concept, right? Like things can feel really going really smooth, really easy. Like, yeah, my eating disorder isn't very loud, or I'm not really struggling with this much. And so you are hoping that you're closer to the finish line if that's the way that you're looking at it. But, you know, life happens, things happen, change occurs, tragedies occur, grief occurs. And in those moments, it's so much easier to, maybe for some people, to lean on those old behaviors because they're comforting. We know how to do them really well. It's a space that we know. And so having to turn from that in moments that are really, really hard is really, really hard. A lot of people can go through changes or parts of life where things get harder and say like, there's no reason my eating disorder should be louder right now. I'm past this. I thought I was recovered. Well, life gets hard and it's okay that this can come back and say like, hey, I want to be part of the world again. And you can say like, no, I don't want that. But it can still be loud and still be present because it was like a muscle. It was strong at one point. It was something that you used pretty regularly, but choosing to turn away from that and engage in other things intentionally builds the other muscle of recovery much stronger. So it's almost like you're in this recovery path. You've built this muscle so far, and someone's like, actually, more though. Like, we're going to make this a little bit harder on you. You're like, oh, my muscles are so shaky of this recovery muscle, but
you've upped the weight. Yeah,
you've upped the weight. And so it's like, I don't know if I can do it. This is a lot of extra on me that I'm trying to cope with and manage. And so it's understandable that you'd want to try and find some other muscle that you know is strong to lift that weight. But again, choosing those other muscles to work out instead to like truly make that a stronger muscle is going to be supportive of the journey in the long haul. But it's also understandable why you'd want to lean on the other muscles you know work too to kind of lift some of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all part of the journey.
The journey is long for a lot of folks. And it can be tiring. And something I hear a lot is people who have been putting in the work, right? Like really doing it, really doing the practice, and they're tired. How do you approach people who maybe are just saying like, oh, all of this work of recovery is a lot, and there's other pieces of my life that are really big right now?
Yeah. You know, I think that's also unique to each person, the nuance, right? The living in the gray of, well, what is it that's impacting you right now? You are really tired. You're exhausted from how much work this is to try and recover, to try and choose these alternative behaviors that are more life affirming and supportive. And, you know, with individuals who are feeling burnt out on treatment or just so tired of having to fight. Like you had said, still showing up, giving yourself credit for those things that you're still engaging in those recovery behaviors is really important to boost up your ability to feel like I'm still making forward progress. Because if we are feeling really tired in our recovery, if we're feeling exhausted from how much work that it is, if we're also adding on judgment about how hard it has become, well, we're making it even harder for ourselves. And so approaching yourself with compassion and understanding, yeah, this is hard work. Getting tired makes sense. It's understandable that maybe I'm going to be falling into old behaviors sometimes because of how hard this is. But approaching yourself with that compassion and kindness is so important. And I will say that there is a difference between being, kind to yourself or nice to yourself versus having self-compassion, where you say, look, yes, I can say nice things about myself. But ultimately, I believe there are certain nice things about humanity in general, things that human beings in general need to be affirmed and feel fulfilled. And many of those things are about feeling like you are part of a whole, a connected group, to feel as though the things that I struggle with are not unique to me, but part of humanity overall. And I can have compassion for myself because I can have compassion for other people, that life is hard. Things come at you. People deserve to have compassion, and I am people. So being able to kind of reflect some of that back to yourself and say, yes, I can say all these like positive affirmations, and that's great. But if it doesn't feel like that's really doing the trick, well, I do believe that people deserve compassion and empathy and kindness, and I'm included in that. Can kind of build some of the energy that you need to kind of keep a forward momentum if possible.
I love that. And just in case someone needs to hear it, if you have a slip, if you have a behavior, does it undo the progress you've made?
No, no, of course not. You can have a slew of behaviors. It does not undo the progress. Like I said, building insight is a big part of this, right? A lot of times we don't get rid of that insight. Once it's there, we've learned something about ourselves that we might forget later on, but oftentimes that knowledge is still there. And so just because you've slipped into old behaviors doesn't mean you've lost the progress of what you've learned about yourself in your mind, right? You've learned, oh, here are the things that actually trigger me to engage in these behaviors, which I hadn't really deeply thought about before. But now that I know, I can plan ahead when I think those triggers might arise, and I can do something different. And maybe things got hard and I slipped into old behaviors, and that's okay, because I know generally I'm making a forward momentum, and I know that I'm working hard to do these things, and I have some self-compassion that even if I'm struggling, it doesn't mean something about me as a person. It means that I maybe need a little compassion and some grace and some space for myself to be human.
It's like we're all just humans.
Yeah. Oh, what a concept, right?
I know, right?
We're all just little people running around trying to figure out our lives.
All doing our best, trying to cope, learning ways to do that are life affirming. And you've said that a couple times. Could you clarify, like, what does life affirming mean for you?
Yeah, for me, life affirming means it's a behavior, it's a thought process, it's something that I'm engaging in that feels supportive of a life worth living as defined by me. So having a life worth living looks different for each person, right? Somebody might feel like a life worth living is lots of adventure and exploring, and that's great. That's very life affirming for them. For me, maybe it's I like to cozy in and like knit my little projects or color my little coloring books, and that feels really life affirming. So it's unique to each person, but what it means is that I'm doing something that feels like I am engaging in a life or building a life that is what I want, is what's for me, is the definition of what Alicia wants for her life. Maybe not Kristen or anybody else, but for me, this behavior or this thing that I'm engaging in is supportive of that life, rather than maybe an eating disorder behavior, right? Where if all those little things are important to me about staying cozy in my home and like having these little tasks that I do and these cute little hobbies, yeah, if I look at my eating disorder behaviors, like that's not really any part of that. Like the life that I want to live does not include that. And so kind of having the process of every so often checking in with yourself to say, like, is this affirming of the life that I want to build and live for myself? And using that as a reminder to say, like, or a guide, really, like a compass of, am I headed in the direction of like building this life or continuing this life that I really love or that I want to create for myself? It can be a nice little way to steer some of like, what am I doing? And is this right or is this wrong? Well, does it get you closer to this thing, this life that you want for yourself? That's what life affirming means to me.
I love that. And everything you're talking about is just so whole picture human. Like none of this is just about the eating disorder or behaviors. Yeah. It's all about who you are. And I imagine some of the work is figuring that out, right? Like what does it mean to be life affirming for you, right?
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who say, man, I don't really know. I've never really thought about it for myself. I've kind of just gone along with what society kind of says you're supposed to have, right? Like you're supposed to go to school and graduate and get married and have the kids and buy the house. You know, you're supposed to do
all the shoulds. Yeah. I should do this next.
Exactly. All the shoulds. And the reality is that what you want? I don't know. Have you been given the space to actually think about what it is that you do want? And especially in eating disorder recovery, where we are in the illness, like very deep into often what we think other people expect of us. and have what their life affirming is for us is someone else's wish, someone else's goal, someone else's critique.
Mm-hmm.
And to stop and say, what is it that is mine? Like, what do I actually want? Can be really hard, really, really hard for some people because they've never had to do it before. And so it's a task, it's a practice. And so once you finally have built that picture, which is hard to do, it can be a little easier to see where we're going. It's kind of like it creates a roadmap a little bit of like, yeah, where is my destination? Like, what kind of life do I want to build for myself? And now I know the steps I might need to take along the way to get me there, to live this life that feels affirmed to the things that I want, not just what the outer world around me wants for myself or wants for me.
Wow. That is really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I really love self-compassion, life affirm, like creating a values-driven life, but is meaningful for you specifically, like giving yourself the agency and autonomy to say, I deserve to have these things that I want, and it's within my reach, and I can grab for it. I can grasp it. I can do the things I need to try and get myself there.
Alicia, thank you so much for talking this through, for joining us. I'm gonna have to think more about what's life affirming for Kristen. I think it's a really beautiful thing and something I'm going to spend a little bit more time thinking about. I'm inspired after this conversation.
Yeah, I hope all of our watchers and listeners are too, to kind of take that moment to
so too.
What is for me versus what other people want for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much. It's been a real joy talking to you, and I hope you have a really incredible rest of your day.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. You too. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in, watching with us so far. And especially thank you to ERC, who's one of today's sponsors and part of the reason why we are able to be here having this incredible conversation. So now I'm just going to go ahead and take a pause and ask everyone to check in with themselves. How are you doing? We've been talking about some really incredible things with some things that bring up some good feelings. So if you've been with us all day so far, maybe stand up, take a stretch, do something that feels good for you. And if you're just joining us, get ready because there is even more to come. So again, just reminding everyone, as we have to do, ANAD is a nonprofit. All of our services are free, and we really exist to train and support the volunteers who are the ones doing our work. So if you are one of them, interested in being one of them, have been helped by one of them, please scan that QR code, donate to us. That would be a huge help. So here I'm going to end this stream, and we will be getting ready to hop over into the next one. So I'll see you over there.